6:10 on Wall Street. Time now for the Burton Accountants and Advisors Sports Report. And you made it to Friday, John Stashower.
Yeah, indeed, John. The Nets and 21 other NBA teams are in Orlando. The bubble experiment is underway. Major League Soccer teams got to Orlando earlier, and that league has seen two teams, Chicago and Nashville, have to stop playing because so many of their players have tested positive for COVID. NBA teams will be practicing this weekend. The games begin at the end of July. The depleted Nets, who've had 5 players opt out, have added another veteran, Michael Beasley, second pick of the draft back in 2008. This will be his 8th team. MLS back playing yesterday. NYCFC lost to Philadelphia 1-0. The PGA Tour is in Muirfield, Ohio this week and next. The bigger tournament is next week. Memorial. Tiger Woods is going to play. It'll be his first tournament since mid-February. Update on the sale of the Mets. Hedge fund king Steve Cohen, whose $2.6 billion deal to buy fell through, could be back in now that the preconditions are no longer in place. The price tag has also gone down, but New York Post reports that if all bids are close, owner Jeff Wilpon would prefer to sell to the group that includes Alex Rodriguez and Jennifer Lopez. One NFL wide receiver reacted to comments made by another, the Patriots' Julian Edelman, after the Eagles' Deshaun Jackson made anti-Semitic remarks.
Jewish heritage. And for me, it's not just about religion. It's about community and culture as well. I'm unusual because I didn't identify as Jewish until later in my life. Whenever I encountered hatred, it never really felt like it was aimed at me. It was only after I was part of this community that I learned how destructive hate is.
Edelman invited Jackson to visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. John?
All right, John, thank you. And a programming note, tune in tonight for the Bloomberg Business Sports Show. This is when we speak with the Cincinnati Reds pitcher, Trevor Bauer. He tells us about contentious negotiations that finally led to a deal to play baseball this season, plus what the game will look like in the midst of the pandemic. Catch that conversation tonight at 7, tomorrow at 11 a.m., right here on Bloomberg Radio. You're listening to Bloomberg.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual funds.
Okay, I'm moving down my stop on profit for Japanese yen. So I'm moving stop to 106.850. So stop on profit for Japanese yen. I placed for all my positions, all 3 positions, at the price 106.850.
File tax returns at JCF. All of that is done for you. You don't have to get involved in anything other than making your contribution to your fund and then determining which grants that you want to make.
A JCF fund may be opened with a minimum $5,000 contribution of cash or appreciated securities and can be used as an alternative to or together with a private foundation.
If you have a foundation, you have to list all of the contributions that you made. Potentially anybody, because the information is public, can find out exactly which organizations a foundation has made charitable contributions to.
Let JCF simplify your philanthropy and protect your privacy. Learn more about JCF's private client group at jcfny.org.
Imagine.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Friday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
In line with government guidelines, face coverings are now compulsory on public transport.
At Asda, you can get a 4-pack of Prima disposable face coverings for £2.80, or a 2-pack of washable face coverings from £2.50. Asda, we're all in this together. Selected stores subject to availability.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
We've got some of your faves waiting for you on Just Eat. KFC, Burger King and Subway. Spend as much or as little as you like. No minimum spend here. We'll always deliver like a G. I mean, I would know. I'm pretty G myself, thank you very much.
If somebody say, Just Eat.
T's and C's apply. Selected stores and locations.
Riggs.
Uber is trying to achieve that long-awaited, elusive profitability. They're announcing plans to acquire the food delivery rival Postmates for about $2.65 billion. Some are welcoming the consolidation as a means to limit losses, while others expect an Uber-Postmates merger to now draw some antitrust scrutiny. Joining us now is Steve Jong. He's the founder and managing partner of Kindred Ventures, and he was an early investor in both Uber and Postmates. So, Steve, great to get your perspective on this. And I'm really curious, this market was desperate for consolidation. Is this the right deal, even though Postmates maybe wasn't a big competitor? I guess you just want to take out a competitor and consolidate in any way you can?
I think the important thing to note here is that these two companies have competed against each other for better part of a decade. Postmates started out as a courier API, in fact, and wasn't food focused. Uber Eats came into the market well after Uber ride sharing did, and there were early acquisition talks actually about merging the two companies about 4 years ago. And I think at that time, Uber Eats was seeing hypergrowth as a new business subsidiary within Uber on the Uber platform.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm Nathan Hager. European stocks are fluctuating this morning as investors weigh positive corporate news against the stalling equity rally in China and a rising number of coronavirus cases in this country. Treasuries are jumping, sending yields near record lows. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are lower by 14 points. Dow futures down 139. NASDAQ futures down 28 points. DAX in Germany, CAC in Paris both up by 0.1%. 10 years up 11/30 seconds. The yield 0.57%. 2-year yield 14 basis points. NYMEX crude oil is down 2.6%, down $1.02 to $38.60 a barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.5% of $9.20 at $18.13 even an ounce. The euro at 1.1294 against the dollar. The yen is at 106.76. And at 8:30 Wall Street time, we get the June Producer Price Index. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. For the first time, daily coronavirus cases in the U.S. have passed 60,000. Governor Doug Ducey says testing will be ramping up in Arizona as the state deals with a high positivity rate. A former top prosecutor in New York said he was pressured to step aside by Attorney General William Barr as his office was investigating President Trump's businesses and inaugural committee. According to the New York Times, Jeffrey Berman, the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, said Barr warned him that his firing would be detrimental to his career. The Big Ten Conference said fall sports teams, including football, will play only conference opponents. It is the first Power 5 conference to announce an adjustment to its college football season because of the coronavirus pandemic. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. John.
Michael, thank you. And we are live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, where it's now 6:20 on Wall Street. on this steamy Friday before the open. Futures in the red right now in the U.S. If you look at a chart of the S&P 500 from its March low, it is up right now about 41%. Let's bring in our next guest this morning, Bloomberg equity strategist Gina Martin Adams. That kind of says to me maybe too quickly, too fast, too high.
Yeah, I think you're not alone in thinking that, John. Certainly there are a lot of investors that are a bit concerned we might have bounced back too high. I mean, I think you want to keep in mind, though, that we did have the worst quarter since the Great Depression. So net, markets are basically flat on the year. We just had an awful first quarter followed by a very, very big bounce back in the second quarter. I think that the thing that changed in the second quarter was policy and policy only. We did start to re-rate stocks based upon the fact that interest rates were going to remain extremely low into perpetuity, and the Fed balance sheet doubled. But now those factors have sort of passed, and we're looking forward to the future, and we're having a hard time kind of finding what's going to create the next leg up for stocks. And I think earnings season certainly presents that possibility, but there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of skepticism that companies can produce any kind of earnings results that are going to provide that necessary optimism to create the next leg higher. Analysts are forecasting a 43% drop in earnings year over year, certainly writing off expectations for 2020. So expectations are very, very low, but can companies start to improve those expectations or not is the critical question right now.
Well, are we really over the policy initiatives from the central banks?
Well, the balance sheet at the Fed stopped rising in early June, and then by no coincidence, that's the point in time when the equity market stopped rising. So certainly, at least in the U.S., the fact that the balance sheet stopped increasing does appear to have been pretty consequential for at least rotation. At that point in time, we saw the financials stop outperforming. We saw energy stocks stop outperforming. Some of the high volatility as well as high value shares that had driven much of the April and May rally and bounce back in stocks stopped increasing and have even given back some of those gains in the last month or so as investors have rotated back toward the higher quality, higher defensive sort of COVID winners. So it does appear to have been somewhat consequential. Now the question remains, will we get another leg higher? Will we get an extension of unemployment benefits? Will we get another fiscal package? There certainly is that possibility, but it does appear that we at least priced in the policy efforts that we had engaged in through March and April over the course of the March to June months.
Okay, so if I have to be more discriminating now, the question is, are we overvalued, cheap, just right? What specifically do I have to look at?
Well, I think when you look at the market at large, we have absolutely priced in lower for longer rates. Our model says we should be trading somewhere around 20 to 21 times earnings, considering the interest rate backdrop. And that's about where we ended up topping out for the S&P 500. So we've certainly priced lower for longer rates. It will take something more from the Fed to create that next leg higher in multiples. That said, we have not priced for much on the earnings side, and that's why I highlight the earnings season is so critically important, because following major recession lows of the last 50 years, on average, earnings have recovered by 10% over that next year. Analysts are now forecasting about a 1% recovery over the next year. So if we can get even halfway close to average, we should see about a 5% earnings growth rate emerge in the second half of this year and into the first half of 2021. That's certainly slower than the past, but it's better than what analysts are forecasting. So that's the critical thing to watch right now is, can we actually get any earnings growth out of companies? Will the economic reopening start to last? Obviously there have been a lot of bits of evidence that have emerged over the last 6 weeks that would suggest that we should be pretty cautious in our expectations for earnings growth, and I think that's why the market's somewhat stalled here.
Out of the gate, we're going to get the bank earnings, of course, the loan loss provisions, et cetera, so forth. That's going to set the stage, and it sounds like you're saying it's not going to be a very pretty picture, at least initially. 30 seconds, if you could.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a very pretty picture. The financials were a disappointment. The first quarter earnings season really kicking off a tough time, and they're not starting off on such solid ground this season either. So it could be a rocky road ahead.
Gina, always a pleasure. Appreciate it. Bloomberg equity strategist Gina Martin-Adams and ahead of the open on Wall Street. Right now, the futures in the red this Friday morning. Dow futures down 158 points, down about 0.6%. The S&P futures, they're 15 points lower. That's down 0.5% this morning. And NASDAQ E-mini futures, 32 points lower. That is down 0.3%. And you are listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Working from home has boosted the fortunes of personal computer makers. Two researchers are out with new numbers that vary widely from each other, but both show improvement over last year. Gartner says PC makers shipped 2.8% more devices in the second quarter compared with a year earlier. Rival industry analyst IDC pegs the year-over-year increase at 11%. Both firms said the increase was fueled by especially strong growth in Europe and the U.S. The U.S. entity of Japanese retailer Muji, known for its minimalist home goods, has filed for bankruptcy, adding to a growing list of industry companies reeling from the pandemic. Muji's U.S. unit joins more than 110 companies that have declared bankruptcy in the U.S. this year and blame the coronavirus crisis in part for their demise. Stock futures are pointing to a move lower at the open this morning. It was a mostly lower close on Wall Street yesterday. The Dow and the S&P 500 were lower. The NASDAQ was higher. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought... Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Friday morning by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Honda. We're not a car company. We're more of a listening company. And now our ears have brought our attention to where people feel most comfortable, the lounge. So we asked ourselves, what could Honda do to innovate in this space? Well, how about more space? Calm and uncluttered, with modern yet retro styling, and built-in screens compatible with your games console. It's the most comfortable lounge you've ever driven. Introducing the new Honda E, our small electric city car. Honda, the power of dreams.
Tuesdays at KFC gonna get you like, wow, pow, chow, kapow, get down right now. If you know how, then take a bow. Because this deal's gonna raise a brow. Get 9 pieces of original recipe chicken for an eye-popping $5.99. What the... Every Tuesday at KFC. Participating restaurants ends 18th of August 2020. Tuesdays only, subject to availability, not available online.
Give yourself a Diet Coke break.
Minions, did you know Sky Broadband Superfast guarantees your speed? No, Stuart, it doesn't guarantee you'll win the game. Or that your video will go viral. Or that you'll match with the love of your life. But Sky Broadband Superfast does guarantee the speed we promised or money back. So reliable, it's minion-proof. Sky. Believe in better. Sky Fibre Areas only. Speed measured to hub. Must drop below min download speed for 3 consecutive days. 1 month subscription refund. Claim up to twice in midterm after first fortnight. See sky.com.
Looking to freshen up your listening on TuneIn? Head to the homepage to discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage.
This is Mike Golick from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Trey Wingo, my son, and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Where is 6:30 on Wall Street? Good morning. I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Nathan Hager. We're just about 3 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures are lower after daily coronavirus cases in the U.S. passed 60,000 for the first time. Arizona is seeing its highest number of infections in 6 days. That's prompting a warning from Governor Doug Ducey.
People are safer at home, and if they don't have any place to go, stay home.
Ducey is now tying increased infections directly to reopening efforts. He's telling restaurants to limit capacity to 50% and delaying a decision on whether to open classrooms for the school year.
In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis is pushing ahead with plans for in-person classes.
There's something to be said for being in school, seeing people you know, growing up like a normal kid.
That's despite another day of record deaths in Florida. Record fatalities also being reported in Texas, Arizona, and California.
In New Jersey, worries remain over a transmission rate that's creeping up from previously low levels. Governor Phil Murphy has mandated face masks in public and will enforce the measure with fines.
We expect folks to do the right thing here. And do we reserve the right to warn them, to summons them, to fine them potentially? Absolutely, we have to.
On Wednesday, New Jersey's transmission rate reached 1.1. That's the number of people each COVID-positive person infects. Just weeks ago, the rate stood at 0.6.
The jump in coronavirus cases had investors selling stocks yesterday. We saw a similar reaction in Asia overnight. Shares in China led declines after government-owned funds announced plans to trim holdings. Well, traders are taking that as a warning the country's equity boom has gone too far.
And in Washington, an announcement on tariffs could come today in the battle between France and the White House over taxes on big tech. Here with that story is Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
Sources say the tariff list to be released will be in the ballpark of $500 to $700 million. The items targeted could include levies on French wine, cheeses, and handbags. One source says the U.S. may delay the implementation of the duties until France starts collecting its tax later this year. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Charlie, thank you. Now let's see how stocks are faring this morning. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are lower by 14 points. Dow futures down 137. NASDAQ futures down 26. 10-year Treasury is up 11/32. The yield 0.57%. Yield on a 2-year note 0.14%. NYMEX crude oil down 2.5%, down $1 at $38.62 a barrel. The euro is at 1.1293 against the dollar. The yen is at 106.80. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
And thanks. 6:33 on Wall Street. Let's get news from around the world this morning. And we say good morning once again to Michael Barr.
John, thank you very much. It's not a strong tropical storm, but it is expected to be a rainmaker in the tri-state area. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn has the latest.
Michael, we have an area of low pressure that's bringing rain to the Jersey coast. It's going to come up into the tri-state area today. The Hurricane Center's decided to call this Faye, and that's why the tropical storm warnings are in effect. It's not a true tropical storm. It's an area of low pressure that's got tropical moisture associated with it. So what we'll see is rain heavy at times in the tri-state area this morning. It'll continue to the afternoon. It'll become breezy, especially along the coast where we could see gusts over 30 miles an hour. System's going to move fairly quickly. That should limit the rainfall about 1 to 3 inches. Watch out for some localized roadway flooding later today. Michael?
Thank you very much, Rob. Malls are allowed to open today in New York regions in Phase 4. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio is canceling large events that require a permit through September. De Blasio says he does not understand some decisions being made in other states after his city was widely used as an example of how bad it can get.
Anyone who watched what happened in New York City would have to be really sober about saying we're not going to risk lives and ignore the science. But unfortunately, a lot of politicians decided it was more important to do what Donald Trump said.
Also yesterday, de Blasio helped to paint a Black Lives Matter mural on Fifth Avenue right at the Trump Tower's doorstep. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy says there were 28 new COVID-19 deaths yesterday and 354 new cases. Murphy, speaking to Bloomberg, says, as for the state's economic impact from COVID-19, we're going to need revenue boosters.
We will have to borrow money. This is not either or, it's and both. And we'll probably have to put some revenue raisers on the table as well as we develop our next budget.
President Trump reacted to the Supreme Court, rejecting his complaints that he's being harassed, and ruled in favor of a New York prosecutor's demands for Trump's tax records.
This is purely political. I win at the federal level, and we won very decisively, and so they send it into New York. And you know what's going on in New York. Everyone's leaving. It's turned out to be a hellhole.
However, the president's taxes and other financial records will likely be kept out of the public eye at least until after the election. President Trump's former personal lawyer is back behind bars after refusing the terms of home confinement, which include constraints on talking to the press. Michael Cohen, who is serving a 3-year sentence for campaign finance violations, was released on furlough in May and allowed to return to his home in Manhattan. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. John.
Michael, thank you. 6:36 on Wall Street. And he is timed out for the Burton Accountants and Advisors Sports Report. Here's John Stashower.
All right, thanks, John. As the 4 pro sports leagues all get ready to play college sports, another matter the day after the Ivy League said there'll be no games this fall. Big Ten football made a move to limit games and travel. Teams will only play within the conference, so out are games like Ohio State versus Oregon, Michigan and Washington, plus a game that was to be played in Green Bay between Wisconsin and Notre Dame. Other leagues may follow suit. The athletic director at Ohio State says he's pessimistic about any football being played this fall. The Nets practiced in Orlando. They have added to the roster veteran Michael Beasley, but he can't practice until he tests negative for 6 straight days, and he can't play games until he serves a 5-game drug suspension. The Knicks working on hiring a new coach. They're 8 in 9 years. Yesterday's interview was with Tom Thibodeau. He's seen as the favorite to get the job. Tiger Woods' his first golf tournament since February will be next week. The Memorial in Ohio. It's a tournament he has won 5 times. The Mets last winter had a deal in place for Steve Cohen to buy the team for $2.6 billion. The deal fell through, and now the price tag has reportedly gone down to about $1.7 billion. New York Post reports the group that includes Alex Rodriguez and Jennifer Lopez is the one that the Wilpons would prefer to sell to. The NFL team in Washington expected to change its name. Redskins out, and a favorite has emerged to be the new name, the Warriors. With no fans, MLB teams may want to pipe in crowd noise. The Angels did it for an intra-squad game. Anthony Rendon called it dumb, said he would prefer they just play music. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. John.
All right, John, thanks a lot. It is now 6:37 on Wall Street. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak. New Jersey was once part of the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak. Then the state flattened the curve. Now there are fresh worries at increasing transmission rate and the question about reopening school in the fall. Bloomberg's David Weston sat down with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy to discuss the state's response to the virus and where it goes from here. Let's listen to part of that conversation right now.
We have to get through the summer, but then we have the fall coming in school, the issue of school, which is very much on the national agenda, not just in New Jersey, as President Trump has really pushed to reopen the schools. What are your plans at this point? To what extent are you planning on people actually being in the classroom as opposed to remote learning?
So our Department of Education and Department of Health put out standards a couple of weeks ago, very comprehensive, largely defining the parameters and the basic principles, and leaving it up to our districts to develop their plan and come back for our common agreement. Our bias is to get kids back into the classroom. That's the starting point. But we have to do it responsibly. I think, David, the toughest nut to crack is going to be preventing the unwitting passing of the virus from an asymptomatic, young, healthy kid to an older educator or administrator or someone with underlying health challenges. So the whole notion of capacity constraints, social distancing, face coverings, lots of hyper hygiene, etc., doing things outdoors wherever possible, those are all going to be elements of what we think it will look like.
There will be some things that no doubt will be statewide. Let me talk about testing. For example, are you considering requiring that every person, every instructor, every member of staff be tested before they go back to school to teach and serve the students come fall?
If we could do it, yes. We have a daily capacity right now in New Jersey that is somewhere 25 to 30,000 tests a day. Absolutely. The only obvious point to make is even if we're able to achieve that, and I think we could achieve it, this is a virus that doesn't just, it's not a one and done. We got that out of the way, check the box, we're good to go. This is an iterative reality that we're living with. And that's the only caution I would say. This is until we have therapeutics that are developed explicitly for COVID-19, certainly until we have a vaccine, we've got to keep coming back to testing and tracing and doing the right things.
That's New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy speaking with Bloomberg's David Weston late yesterday on Bloomberg Radio and television. Ahead of the market open on Wall Street, Dow futures 119 points lower. The S&P futures down 12 points. The NASDAQ E-mini futures are down 21 points. This is Bloomberg.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education and to finish what I started to get my diploma. Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury.
For the friendships, for the fresh air, for the space to grow, for the knowledge, for the sport, for the outdoor education, for the wide horizons, for the academic excellence, for the future. Unleash your child's education at West Buckland School, a co-educational day and boarding school in beautiful North Devon. If you're moving to the southwest for a better quality of life, this is education without compromise, in what the Good Schools Guide called a gem of a school in an exceptional location. To see for yourself, find us at westbuckland.com.
Eurotunnel-Le-Château is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel-Le-Château, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel, Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So, you've been holed up for a while.
Not in here!
The place has got a little, let's say, lived in. At Wix, we'll create your dream kitchen or bathroom from design to show-off ready. And to keep everything safe, you can book a free virtual design appointment. Plus, now there's up to 50% off showroom kitchen units. Cure your house embarrassment safely with Wix. For more offer details, see wix.co.uk.
In line with government guidelines, face coverings are now compulsory on public transport. At Asda, you can get a 4-pack of Prima disposable face coverings for £2.80, or a 2-pack of washable face coverings from £2.50. Asda, we're all in this together. Selected stores subject to availability.
I was offered one.
I was offered one. Were you?
Yeah, I was offered one too.
1 2 1 2. I was offered one.
I was offered one.
Don't take our word for it. 9 out of 10 people said they were offered a great value deal with O2. Get yours today, in-store, online, or by phone.
I was offered one too. O2 Retail Exit Survey 309 of 348 agreed with the statement. O2 offered me a great value deal. For full verification, see o2.co.uk/terms.
Connecting decision makers to a network of news and financial information 24 hours a day. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
Federal health officials won't revise their coronavirus guidelines for reopening schools despite criticism from President Trump. The head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Dr. Robert Redfield, says his agency will help states reopen schools safely.
We're going to work with the school districts to really work to basically get practical situations that they can reopen their schools safely. We're going to monitor, obviously, these guidances in the school setting to see that we're really not seeing significant transmission.
The mayor of the South Korean capital of Seoul, considered one of the country's most powerful political figures, has been found dead. Park Won-soon's body was found on a mountain in a Seoul neighborhood a few hours after his daughter reported him missing. Asian stock markets are following Wall Street lower today on worries economic recoveries might fade as coronavirus cases increase. I'm John Trout.
Pandemic information is coming at you so quickly, it's hard to react, never mind plan.
How bad do you think it's going to get?
How much more cutting do you need to do?
Here's help. Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm Nathan Hager. U.S. futures are sliding as a buying frenzy in China cools and concern resurfaces that rising coronavirus infections will hurt the global recovery. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 10 points now. Dow futures down 112. NASDAQ futures lower by 20 points. 10 years up, 10.30 seconds. The yield at 0.58% now. The yield on a 2-year 0.14%. NYMEX crude oil is down 2.1%, down 84 cents at $38.78 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.6% or $10.50 at $18.1430 an ounce. The euro 1.1296 against the dollar. British pound 1.2617. And the yen is at 106.78. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael?
Nathan, for the first time, daily coronavirus cases in the U.S. have passed 60,000. Florida, Arizona, Texas, and California reported record deaths from the virus. Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden launched his plan to revive the economy from the coronavirus-related recession with a promise to build back better than what existed before the crisis. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. John.
All right, Michael, thank you. And we are live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, where it is coming up on 6:49 on Wall Street. Time now to check in what's going on in D.C. And some of the top stories in our nation's capital include President Trump seeking to harness his Supreme Court losses in making his case for re-election. Democrats come up short again in their bid to investigate the president. Also making news, Joe Biden offering a Build Back Better plan to revive the U.S. economy. And finally, President Trump heading to COVID-stricken Florida for a fundraiser. Let's dive deeper now into these stories. We are joined by Bloomberg Washington reporter Kathleen Hunter. Kathleen, thanks for being with us. Happy Friday. Well, let's start off with this president seeking to harness the Supreme Court losses. What exactly is he trying to do in terms of galvanizing the political base? What's the strategy here?
Well, I think that essentially he's going back to an argument that he made in 2016, which is something we've seen him do on a number of issues, everything from China to race relations to immigration. But here what we're seeing is him making the case that these Supreme Court losses show the need for an additional Trump term because he needs 4 more years in office to help appoint conservative judges and influence the judiciary, pull it to the right, so that he's more able to influence, the kinds of cases that come up to the Supreme Court, if not the makeup of the Supreme Court himself. In his first 4 years in office, we know he's already appointed 2 justices to the court. It's worth noting that both those justices sided against him yesterday in the case that dealt with the grand jury subpoenas for his tax and other financial records. But I think that the argument he's going to be making to his base, at least, is that they need to come out and vote on November 3rd because he needs their help in getting him reelected so that he can appoint more conservative judges to the federal bench.
Yeah, and this is some have said a monumental election for the landscape, the judicial landscape, right?
Absolutely. It certainly can be. We know that Trump has appointed, a number of judges already to, district and appeals court positions. Most significantly, he has already appointed 2 justices to the Supreme Court. There are a number of older justices on the Supreme Court, so a sense of whether or not there could be more vacancies. Ruth Bader Ginsburg has had some health troubles in the past, obviously a very liberal justice. And, we did find out this week that while it seemed as though it may not be that serious, but, there was a story about Chief Justice John Roberts having been hospitalized last month after a fall while exercising. And it just underscores, I think, the degree to which there could be some opportunity in the next 4 years for whoever's president to name some new justices to the court.
Our next story, Democrats coming up short again in their bid to investigate the president. Of course, this revolves around a Supreme Court decision yesterday.
Yes, and so essentially this was more or less a separation of powers case, and Democrats who control the House had subpoenaed some of Trump's financial records, and the president was more or less claiming that executive privilege covered him from having to turn those over. And he was, for now at least, that argument has prevailed because the justices decided to essentially return it back down to the lower appeals courts and have them, take another look at the issue. And so from a practical political standpoint, that's a big win for Trump because, once Democrats on the Hill got a hold of his financial records, it wouldn't be long, I would imagine, before they become public. And now it's looking less likely like that's going to happen before the election.
Also making news, our next story, what is Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan?
Well, I think, we heard from the Democratic contender, Joe Biden, yesterday about this is his economic plan, his economic vision that he's laying out for a way to get the U.S. economy back up and running, in the wake of the coronavirus. And so I think that this is really him sort of making a political attempt to hit Trump where it hurts, given that the economy is not doing as well as a lot of folks on the Trump campaign had imagined back in January or February that it would be, to put it mildly. And so I think that this is Biden essentially laying out his alternate vision and talking about, ways to spur manufacturing, spur innovation, and, paint him as a strong alternative to Trump when it comes to the economic issues that have really been at the core of Trump's reelection argument up until now.
And, of course, President Trump heading to COVID-stricken Florida for a political fundraiser this week. And so he's going to be busy also visiting a fundraiser in New Hampshire, a political rally inside with supporters in an airplane hangar. Kathleen, thanks very much. We appreciate it. You can read more about these stories on Bloomberg.com or on the Bloomberg terminal. Also, a reminder, you can follow all the latest on Bloomberg Radio in Washington. That's Bloomberg 99.1 and 105.7 FM HD2. Nathan,
John, thank you. It is 6:53 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NJIT STEM report. It's brought to you by New Jersey Institute of Technology, ranked in the top 2% nationally for alumni mid-career earnings and number 1 for student upward economic mobility. Learn more at njit.edu. Now here's what's making news in science, technology, engineering, and math. In Scotland, the UK Space Agency is backing 2 coronavirus-related tech projects. It's boosting funds for drones, delivering COVID-19 test kits to remote Scottish islands, as well as for an app that uses space-derived data to identify and support vulnerable people. The Scottish space sector has seen significant growth in recent years, building more small satellites than anywhere else in the world except for the United States. 3D maps of the universe have revealed one of the biggest cosmic structures ever found. It is a wall stretching 1.4 billion light years that contains hundreds of thousands of galaxies. According to Live Science, the South Pole Wall, as it's been dubbed, has remained undetected until now because large parts of it sit 500 million light years away behind the bright Milky Way galaxy. And in tech news, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company posted monthly revenue that suggests June quarter sales beat estimates. TSMC is the main chip maker for Apple. It is often a barometer for the industry. The company expects robust demand for semiconductors in data centers as they host an unprecedented surge in online activity during the pandemic. And that is today's Bloomberg NJIT STEM report. John?
All right, Nate, thanks. It is 6:55 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg Small Business Report. Today, we're speaking with Lily Pacheco. In 2007, she started Natural Languages, based in New Jersey. Her small business provides interpreters. A lot of the work is in person. This is between doctors and patients, for instance, who don't speak the same language. Lily, how has the pandemic impacted your business?
We were forced to migrate over to our home offices. In the next few days, a lot of our clients just canceled our appointments. What we do is we provide interpreters, on-site interpreters for medical appointments.
Okay. Well, how have you been able to pivot during all this?
We quickly contacted our clients and just to touch base and see how they're doing and offer them solutions. So Zoom has been our best friend for the last few months. We also save cost by exercising the early termination clause within our lease. The primary concern for me was to keep my staff intact. I have a really good team, and I want to keep it that way. We also applied for the payroll protection program, and it was approved, and that did help a lot.
It's been a difficult and challenging time for your small business, no doubt, but also on a personal side, you were telling me it's also been very difficult. Can you talk about that?
On April 16, my dad was really, really sick. He can hardly breathe. We called the ambulance. He didn't make it. He already had passed on the couch. So I witnessed all of this on video. Normally, I would have been there in person, right? And, we're stuck in quarantine, and all I was able to do was just watch from the video. So it was really hard.
Like a lot of small business people, you're very resilient, though, in both your business and in life, I would imagine.
As an entrepreneur, we're used to this roller coaster, right? So we make it through. We'll make it through.
All right, Lily. Thanks, Lily Pacheco, owner of Natural Languages. Thoughts with you and your family, too. Right here on Bloomberg Radio, we're going to continue to bring you stories of small businesses trying to survive during the pandemic every day at this time. And that is your Bloomberg Small Business Report. Just ahead, Bloomberg Surveillance. We're waiting for Tom Keene, John Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, right here on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. Don't miss it this Friday morning. Ahead of that, Dow Futures right now, they're down 97 points. The S&P Futures about 10 points lower, down 0.3%. And the NASDAQ E-mini Futures down 20 points. For Nathan Hager, I'm John Tucker. You are listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Influential conversations.
The big Volkswagen event is now on. If you're after a new Volkswagen, we offer to pay your first 3 months finance payments and an additional £500 to £1,000 contribution to your deposit at 3.8% APR representative. Hello, sir. Do any take your fancy?
Well, yes, a new Golf or T-Cross. A Tiguan. No, Passat. Oh, I need to sit down.
Here, have a seat.
The big Volkswagen event. With every type of car on offer, you may have trouble choosing. With Solutions Personal Contract Plan until 12th of July. Excludes e-golf at participating retailers only. Minimum 46 months to receive 3 months finance payments. Indemnities may be required. Volkswagen Finance. Contact your local retailer to book an appointment.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
At Halfords, we're here to get you where you want to be. We can replace your battery at over 700 stores and garages, or even at your home or work with our mobile experts, so you can enjoy an engine that starts first time, every time, and start enjoying the open road again.
Are we nearly there yet?
From battery replacements to tyre fittings to MOTs, there really is no job too big or too small. Halfords, for life's journeys.
Capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
No one at this point, analysts, companies, strategists, portfolio managers, has a great sense for what earnings will be in 2020 or in 2021.
We're in this very strange situation where the separation side of the labor market is still bad, but claims really only tell us about half the story.
Let's not confuse bounce with recovery.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz.
From New York City for our audience worldwide, good morning, good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance with equity futures negative. We're live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Tom Keene, together with Lisa Abramowitz, I'm Jonathan Farrow. Tom, this has been building and building over the last month, then finally a break. Treasury yields breaking lower.
That is exactly the description of the mathematics I saw on the Bloomberg terminal this morning, John. There's no question, folks, it's been a persistent grind, and it is mathematically elegant to see the 2-year yield come in and the 10-year and the 30-year bond with a vengeance come in as well. And, John, with it is that signal of slowdown, massive curve flattening.
10-year yields just breaking 60 basis points, Tom. In the equity market, we're down about 8 points, a mild move lower on the S&P 500, off by 0.25%. Lisa, phase one was about access to capital and drawing down credit lines. Just follow the corporate behavior. Phase two is about the permanent decisions, the long-term decisions, the cuts, the layoffs. That's what's been building this week.
And we've seen those cuts and those layoffs that are likely to be ongoing, with a number of CFO studies pointing to the idea that bigger companies in particular looking to shrink their workforces further through the end of this year. The thing I'm watching is how much can we plug the gap, the deficit of production with respect to fiscal stimulus. And I think that's where the focus is going to be. And as we wait for that, we're going to be looking at the data, some of the data coming out today at 8:30 a.m. We've got the U.S. June Producer Price Index, a measure of inflation, to see whether we get any pickup there. 1 p.m. Baker Hughes U.S. rig count. This will be interesting, especially in light of the fact that you see shale producers bringing rigs back online due to higher oil prices, and yet demand still suppressed. And then also later today, President Trump heading to Florida for a fundraiser and an anti-drug trafficking event. But really, John, what this will do is bring the focus on the virus. We have more than 4,000 deaths in Florida. The focus will really be on what kind of coordinated effort does the U.S. have to combat the pandemic.
Looking forward to catching up with Kevin Cerulli down in Washington, D.C. in around about 15 minutes following that speech from the former Vice President Joe Biden on the economy. We begin the program this morning, though, looking at risk assets. Would you believe it? The S&P 500 is actually still positive on the week. You can thank the muscle of big tech for that. Beneath the surface, though, quite clearly over the last month, the tension has been building. Is the recovery being derailed or simply slowing down in the United States? Let's start the conversation with David Kelly of JP Morgan Asset Management, who joins us right now. David, which one is it? A recovery derailed or recovery slowing down?
I think for the moment it's slowing down, but I think people will have got the wrong impression from the data from May and June. What really happened is the economy sort of fell off a cliff, hit a trampoline and bounced. But the important part of it is the falling off the cliff. We've seen certain industries that could operate in a pandemic. They shut down in April. They opened up in May and June. That got us a third of the jobs we'd lost back. But we're still down close to 20 million jobs, and the rest of it's really difficult to achieve in a pandemic environment. So what you can see is both all the entertainment industries, all of the sort of fun stuff in life, that's still very much impacted by the pandemic. And the earlier reports we're talking about, a lot of corporations are trying to figure out, well, what do we spend money on? How should we behave in a recession that is likely to linger into 2021, or at least economic bad times into 2021? And I think that's really, it's sort of a wake up to reality here. This is not a pure V. It starts as a V, and now we're sort of onto the back roads of economic recovery, and they're going to be a lot slower from here.
Dr. Kelly, you've done economics for years and you meld it with market strategy. I want you to become a political strategist right now. This morning we see a stunningly low yield regime. What does that do to create urgency for politicians to pass stimulus faster?
Well, it enables them to do that. I mean, the Federal Reserve is monetizing the debt. So far this year, first 9 months of this fiscal year, the federal government has run a deficit of $2.7 trillion. We spent $5 trillion. We took in $2.3 trillion in revenue, but the Federal Reserve basically lent the government at least $2 trillion of that. So it's basically the Federal Reserve is writing a check for whatever Steve Mnuchin wants to do in coordination with Congress. I think it enables the government to do more in terms of supporting the economy, but really what the government needs to do is control the pandemic, because the industries that are being shut down here are not just being shut down by a lack of consumer income. It's because consumers just don't want to get on a plane or pile into a restaurant, and it's very difficult to reopen the schools in this environment. We need to control the pandemic if we're going to see the next leg of recovery here.
David, uncertainty has definitely marked 2020. We have seen that consistently, whether it comes to the pandemic, whether it comes to the next round of fiscal stimulus. As an investor, how do you operate in this type of uncertainty when the safe assets, the havens, are so expensive, with Treasury yields plunging near lows last seen in March?
Well, then they cease to be safe. Safe is an incorrect description in the long run. What I think you have to do is you have to try to cast your mind beyond the pandemic. 2020 is the year of the virus. 2021 will be the year. And I think that those states, those countries that are controlling the virus right now, and they can bring those numbers down, then they can leverage a vaccine to get back to normal. And so that is what's going to happen throughout 2021. But some countries, some regions will do better than others in doing that. But when we get back, you really want to look at those companies which are priced well today. You need to have
David Kelly there of JP Morgan. David, we're going to have to leave it there, sir. I'm sorry. There's a little bit of tension on the line there, which is breaking down just a little bit. My apologies to our audience around the world for that technical issue there with David Kelly's line. Tom Keane, for me, looking around the world right now, the different tolerance levels of individual governments is absolutely amazing. Look at what's happening in the Sun Belt in America and look at how the governors are responding to it. Then you look at a surge of infections in Melbourne, Australia. What happens? Lockdown. Hong Kong, what happens? Schools shut. The tolerance levels are so different, and we all talk about the science, yet the science is being interpreted differently from country to country.
I'll give you a distraction here this morning, John, pushing against this. Jason Bazinet at Citigroup advances Amazon into 2022 with a price target of 3,550. It's an extraordinary report from Bazinet. And John, it shows the digital revolution and the stock market focus you and I have talked about here against all this cacophony of news on a Friday morning.
But it's more than that, Tom. It's the performance of defensive assets in 2020, and what we would consider defensive has shifted somewhat. The traditional safe havens, let's look at long treasuries. Long treasuries up around about 23% year to date. Great performance. Real yields lower. The opportunity cost of holding something like gold shifts. Guess what? Gold up around about 19-20% year to date. But the surprise of 2020 is how we start to perceive the NASDAQ. and the big tech companies in a slowdown like this as a defensive asset. And Lisa, this is the shift. Gold performs, treasuries perform. You expect that to happen. But to see the NASDAQ 100 up 23% year to date has been absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, well, the question is, are these companies worth it, right? Is Amazon worth being a global superpower that exceeds the entire size of the global retailing sector, as Rob Arnott pointed out yesterday on Bloomberg Television? Are the valuations justified here? A lot of people saying yes, they're only going to get bigger. There's not really any kind of push for antitrust movement right now, given the fact that the emphasis is on jobs and preserving American businesses. But this is going to be the tension, right? At what point do these stocks get too expensive? At what point will the recovery trickle out into the other sectors, into small caps, especially as we get more fiscal stimulus? And John, I think it's so unclear. And yet this is sort of the interesting tension, is that the surprise could be to the upside in some of these other stocks where we see a stalling out in the big tech names.
Tom, what's shaping valuations? Low rates, low yields, a 10-year Treasury breaking 60 basis points. That's just part of the story. The other part of the story was this pandemic has accelerated existing trends. We know that. We've discussed it for the last several months. The big are getting bigger, the weak are getting weaker. You see that in retail. That's been playing out all week, and you see it in big tech as well. This pandemic has made the strong stronger. And Tom, if you have a strong balance sheet, guess what? Your borrowing costs are lower. The Fed's in there supporting you. If you have a weak balance sheet and you're struggling, guess what? Your borrowing costs are a whole lot higher. The airline's a perfect example of that.
Well, there's no question about that. And of course, John, something to watch for today into Friday afternoon and into the weekend will be layoff announcements. We've certainly seen many of those this week, and indeed even bankruptcies as well. John, what I would underscore, and I did this to write the 6 a.m. script this morning, is I just took a path north from Miami and looked at the virus news of the great state of Florida, which the president will visit. And to be kind, he's a resident of Florida now, or at least he tells those in New York. I'll tell you, John, the news out of Florida is flat out grim, and yet Disney World, I believe, is going to open on Monday. The Magic Kingdom is going to be there. John, you can go down to Disney World and get a socially distanced hug from Mickey Mouse.
And then if I come back to New York, I've got to self-quarantine for 2 weeks, Tom, and that's the problem, isn't it? Consumers will self-regulate. Deutsche Bank said it a week ago on the program with you, Tom, that this is what would happen. I think it was Matt Lazzetti, that if the consumers don't self-regulate, the businesses will self-regulate, regardless of what the governors do. So as you look around the world right now, sure, lockdown in Melbourne. Sure, today, closure of schools over in Hong Kong. But what you see in the United States is the reopening start to stall, start to slow down. We're all looking at the same high-frequency data, Tom, and it shows up there for all to see. Restaurant bookings, mobility data, it's just starting to flatten out. The credit card spend, the improvement has just started to flatten out a little bit more over the last couple of weeks.
I mean, we're going to do it here on a micro basis, John. The family, if we're on speaking terms, is going to go out to lunch and do it on a sidewalk. And, just that's what we're doing in Manhattan. And you really wonder with Governor Cuomo, even here, how tenuous it is as we look at these real tragedies in the South.
Hey, Tom, I feel for the restaurants most of the time. I feel for them this evening. This weather in New York is going to be brutal through New York City through the day. Through New York City this Friday morning, good morning to you all. Equity futures are recovering just a little bit. We're down 5 points on the S&P 500, off around about 0.2%. A conversation you do not want to miss later in the next hour, 8:30 Eastern. Mohammed Al-Arian joining us right here on Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, thank you very much. For the first time, daily coronavirus cases in the U.S. have passed 60,000. Governor Doug Ducey says testing will be ramping up in Arizona as the state deals with a high positivity rate. Tropical Storm Faye has slightly picked up speed and strength as it moves closer to land, and forecasters decreased projections for rain totals and flooding. Faye is expected to bring 2 to 4 inches of rain with the possibility of flash flooding in parts of the mid-Atlantic and southern New England. President Trump boasted about how well he performed on a cognitive test while coercing Joe Biden, his presumptive Democratic challenger, in November to do the same. Trump spoke during Fox News Hannity show.
The radical left was saying, is he all there? Is he all there? And I proved I was all there because I aced it. I aced the test. and he should take the same exact test, a very standard test. I took it at Walter Reed Medical Center in front of doctors, and they were very surprised.
Joe Biden introduced a New Deal-like economic agenda. During a speech in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, Biden presented the tales of a comprehensive agenda that he touted as the most aggressive government investment in the U.S. economy since World War II.
In addition to bringing back the jobs that have been lost this year, my plan will help create at least 5 million new, good-paying jobs, as experts have looked at it, in manufacturing and innovation.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
Elite advisory firms rely on BNY Mellon's Pershing to meet the needs of their most complex clients. Karen Novak, Chief Operating Officer at Pershing Advisor Solutions, explains how.
At BNY Mellon's Pershing, we bring customized insights and strategies to help you grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon N.A. Member FDIC.
Jenny Liss, Jewish communal leader and philanthropist, talks about why she chose the Jewish Communal Fund for her family's charitable giving.
For a lot of people, it would be the convenience factor. I don't have to track anything.
If charitable giving is an important part of your life, JCF can help you organize your philanthropy with our donor-advised fund. A fund can be established with a minimum tax-deductible contribution of $5,000. Make grants to your favorite charities, and JCF handles all the administration and reporting.
At the year end, our board awards community grants, from fees and endowment income to UJ's annual campaign. We also make gifts to specific organizations, the elderly, Holocaust survivors, the hungry. The fact that we come together as a community at the end of the year to build community, that's what makes us different.
Get better at giving back. To find out more about JCF's impact, visit jcfny.org and download the Giving Report. JCF, we have a gift for giving.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Did somebody say just eat?
Me, get delivery like a G. See, hungry dogs gotta eat. I get mines every day, every week. Chicken wings to the crib, I'm sitting in. Burger in the low. Hope they put the pickle in. Wonton on a catamaran. Oodles and noodles, thank you, my man. J-U-S-T-E-A-T.
Somebody say just eat.
Get ready for the University of Bedfordshire. We've got all you need to make ambition become reality, to make lifelong friendships, to make contacts in your chosen industry, to make a name for yourself, to make it. In fact, we've got everything except your application. So get it in, sit back and relax. Wait, actually, check out our generous scholarships and bursaries for support at every step at beds.ac.uk. Okay, now you can relax.
We test so many people that we have more cases. Everybody says, we have so many cases. That's because we test so many people. We're up to approximately 40 million tests, going up to 45 very quickly. So we have tests. Other countries don't do tests like we do. So we show cases. Other countries don't show cases.
That's the take of the President of the United States right now. At the moment, worldwide, when you see those increasing cases, you see a very different response in places like Australia, Hong Kong and Beijing. From New York City this morning, good morning to you all. Alongside Tom Keene, together with Lisa Bravis, I'm Jonathan Ferro. 2 hours and about 12 minutes away from the opening bell. Equity futures recovering here, down around about 8 points on the S&P, off by 0.25%. Tom, believe it or not, the S&P 500 actually advancing on the week by 0.7%. The story, though, is the equal weight. You just strip that down into an equal weighting of individual constituents on the S&P 500. What do you get? A market that on the week is down about 1.8%. That's the real story, the tension away from mega cap tech.
Yeah, and well said, and we'll talk to Dr. Larian about this and others in the next hour, and I can't say enough, folks, how non-correlated the move in tech is. It's not there in bonds, it's not there in safe havens. Even Euro Swissy is a stronger Swiss franc, all in all, not breaking through to new Swiss strength. Gold up $10 today, so it's really, really a de-risking Friday that we deal with right now. I'm not sure there'll be political risk for President Trump today. He will migrate south to his Florida. The cacophony of news from Jacksonville all the way down to Miami Beach is just absolutely extraordinary. Kevin Cirilli, I'm sure, has never seen anything like this. He joins us now, our chief Washington correspondent. Kevin, I have no clue how the president at this fundraiser addresses what I am reading about from medical officials in Florida. How will he finesse this?
He fires them up. From the Supreme Court to Scranton, yesterday was another dizzying day for the president's reelection efforts. But they're trying to look at these Supreme Court cases yesterday, I'm told, as a way to fundraise, as a way to unite the party and to continue plowing ahead. Yesterday, I spoke with Corey Lewandowski, who is a senior advisor on the president's reelection campaign. Remember, he was the campaign manager at one point back in 2016. And he said, I asked him, how are you going to turn around these poll numbers in some of the battleground states? And he said to me, Tom, it's simple. The message is we want to open the schools and close the border. That's the contrast that they're looking to draw to former Vice President Joe Biden.
Okay. I mean, even the governor of Florida, looking for a more open society, has to address the schools. John Farrell mentions Hong Kong closing down their schools. I mean, Kevin, what is your reading of what Republicans in Florida are telling their president?
It's buckle up for the economic stimulus. And here's where the economic stimulus really becomes to the forefront, because should this pass and should there be a vote on this ahead of the August recess, that's just in time for there to be some cash injected into schools nationwide. Not just public schools, mind you, private schools, charter schools as well. And so that's really where I think, quite frankly, the lobbying arm of the education system, from higher ed to public, private, charter, that's where this is an opening bid of sorts for them to come to the table and to try to get, I don't want to use the word bailout, but to try to get financial assistance to make sure that classrooms are better prepared for should local officials on the ground feel that it's time for students to go back to school.
And Kevin, President Trump will be weighing in on his fiscal plan right after Joe Biden, the former vice president, yesterday laid out in more detail what his plan was for the road ahead. Aside from the actual fiscal spending that he proposed, he talked about raising the corporate tax rate back up to 28% from 21% of the Trump era, going back to the Obama era tax policies. How is that being received?
Well, amongst the left, I mean, it's something that's being received as, okay, good proposal. I think there were many progressives based upon folks that I talked to who were very curious, Lisa, to see precisely where Joe Biden would come down on this. This is largely being seen as a more centrist plan, so to speak. Later today, I'm going to speak with one of the people who helped craft this plan, former Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker. She had a driving force in terms of workforce development and making sure that all different factions of individuals, including minority groups, would have access to reopening the economy. But I want to note something here specifically about this plan, which is this is for Joe Biden to come out and say he wants to end the era of shareholder capitalism is the sign of where exactly he feels the Democratic Party should be headed toward. It is a combination after robust discussions with the Democratic Socialist wing of the party that played out both publicly and privately, and it's a foreshadowing of the direction that he would take the party in should he win on November 3rd.
Well, let's talk about the direction that this administration is going to take fiscal policy in the next several months. I woke up to a really simple question asked by someone on Twitter, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. It is so basic. Why is this administration not going all out on fiscal stimulus ahead of a November election? Why are we taking this so slowly? What's the holdup?
The holdup is that you've got, no one knows what's going to happen in these states where there's been an uptick. No one knows the timetable. No one knows whether, we had the unrest of the past 6 weeks, how that's going to factor in, how the 4th of July celebrations will factor in, all of that, vacation plans, lack thereof, all of that factoring in. So should they just throw money at this all the time, that makes a lot of people very, very uncomfortable. That said, the president has laid down a marker in terms of another potential stimulus happening ahead of the election, with the infrastructure potentially coming in the fall. So you've got really two potential next rounds of stimulus that are viable right now. One path ahead of August, the second path ahead of the election for infrastructure.
Kevin, who is it making uncomfortable when the trajectory of the debt pile in this country is only headed in one direction over the last 3-4 years?
It's the conservatives who are very uneasy about spending more money, and even though we all see the headlines, we all look at the Bloomberg terminal and the data tracker for the coronavirus in Florida, Arizona, California. There are parts of the country that, quite frankly, Jonathan, and you and I have talked about this, parts of the country, quite frankly, good for them, they haven't had to deal with some of the negative health effects that the rest of the United States has had to deal with.
Kevin Cirilli down in Washington, D.C. Tom Keene, so many people don't get it. I'll take a lot of heat for asking a question, but I'll ask the question. Is now really the time to start worrying about the deficit and the debt, given where unemployment is and given where this recovery is going at the moment?
What Gary Schilling would say, John, what Jan Lois would say at J.P. Morgan along with his colleague Joyce Chang, what Steve Major would say at HSBC is, look what the market is saying. These yields are extraordinary. John, we are benumbed by these low yields. Part of that is the disappearance of the wonderful TV show, The Real Yield. But other than that, we're numbed by how low these yields are. You can do all the debt you want at this level.
I'm desensitized by the amount of digs you've taken at me over that program because it's been off the air for the last 4 months. Give me a break, Tom. Every single opportunity. In your market right now, in your stock market, we're down 7 on the S&P 500. We're negative 0.2%. I'm sure you didn't. Coming up on this program, Vitor Gaspar of the IMF, Fiscal Affairs Department Director, a conversation on the fiscal next steps worldwide. This is Bloomberg.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's BABBEL.com.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. There was a...
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Friday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel, Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
Listening has always taught us a lot at Honda. And lately, we've been listening to your thumbs. Because thumbs can do everything now. The world is at their thumb tips. So now, the My Honda Plus app lets the thumb take control of your car too. Even when you're not inside the new Honda E, your thumb can find where you parked, set the temperature before you get in, check how much the battery is charged, and schedule charging for when electricity is cheapest. The new Honda E and My Honda Plus app. Oh, a thumbs up. Honda, the power of dreams.
From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance. For our audience worldwide, we're live on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tom Keene, together with Lisa Bramwitz. I'm Jonathan Ferro on this Friday morning. Good morning. 2 hours away from the opening bell, equity futures improve over the last hour. Negative around about 9 points in the S&P 500, down at 1/3 of 1%, and heading towards a second straight week of gains on a week where so many people have discussed pivoting away from the United States. It is the strength, the weightiness of big tech America that is driving us into the green over the last couple of weeks. In the bond market, Treasury yields come in 3 basis points on the day, on the week by about 8 or 9, sub 60 on a 10-year. Your yield 0.586%. And Tom, a quick snapshot of G10 to round out the market check for you. The price action shaping up as follows: dollar just a little weaker against sterling and the euro advancing several tenths of 1%.
Really interesting, John. For those of you of Global Wall Street working on a Friday and reading into the weekend, this is without question the most important interview Bloomberg will do on the state of global fiscal policy. Vitor Gaspar doesn't get the ink Gita Gopinath gets at the IMF, but trust me, his fiscal monitor is a critical document in these times. Dr. Gaspar joins us now. Vitor, I want you to give me an update on your confidence that we can expand by trillions our debt over the justification that interest rates are so low. Do you buy that concept?
Yes, I do, Tom. So what we emphasize in this blog that I've just put out together with Gita Gopinath is that global debt is at this point in time at record levels. Never in history has global public debt been so high. It is now above 100% of world GDP. It is so high because we're facing a crisis like no other. And in that context, the fiscal response has been very quick and unprecedented. Just to give you an idea, in the last few months, the response of fiscal policy is bigger than during the global financial crisis. If you take together 2008, 9, and 10, so in a few months, we're above the response of 3 years during the global financial crisis. That was absolutely appropriate to support, to extend lifelines to households and firms made vulnerable by the crisis.
Right.
This enormous level of debt, Tom, this enormous level of debt is, in a sense, compensated in terms of impact on the budget by these very low interest rates that you're talking about. And this is
but I want to, Dr. I don't mean to interrupt, sir, but because of time, I want to cut to the chase. We have Dr. El Arian on with us in the next hour. He is acclaimed for speaking of T decisions. What is the T decision we are all going to make 2 and 3 and 5 years out after we count up the trillions of dollars of debt? What is the T decision down the road for political authorities as they look at endless debt?
So I would not put the issue that way. Nominal interest rates and so debt service costs are relatively low as a percentage of GDP, even with these very high levels of debt, because inflation and inflation expectations are very low. And at this point in time, as Gita Gopinath, my colleague, emphasized yesterday, we're more concerned about too low inflation than too high inflation. The epidemic has boosted precautionary savings. Investment will be prudent. And so for a while, we are going to have a situation where savings exceeds investment. So our balance of risks points to the fact that premature withdrawal of fiscal support is a more pressing danger than the high levels of debt. And that's our balance at the moment.
Vitor, there's a question of how companies, how nations are spending the money that they're pumping into their economies as they try to support everything as it gets back up and running. How good a job are nations doing at supporting companies that are viable in the longer term rather than just the zombies that are going to die out, even if they are supported in the short term?
So, as I was saying, the short-term priority, the number one priority is public health, and that requires fiscal support to vulnerable households, vulnerable firms, and those interventions should be regarded as lifelines. As the situation normalizes, as we pass the phase of the great lockdown, as the economies open gradually, we have, in a sense, to pivot towards policies that facilitate the reallocation of resources. And so it is necessary to pivot from support to jobs to support to people, from blanket lending to firms to a much more discriminating approach. And again, as Gita Gopinath said yesterday, it's important that the intervention by the government includes capital-type instruments, equity participations, perhaps even partial nationalizations, so that the issues of solvency can be tackled appropriately and the natural restructuring of the economy actually takes place.
Vitor, this is Philosophy Friday. We hear a lot of big ideas, and this has been an era of big ideas as people try to reimagine what society will look like on the other side. There is a question of how good a job in the here and now governments currently are doing, how optimistic you are based on what you have seen, that they will implement the policies as you're talking about. Are you optimistic about that, or are you sort of doubling down on these messages because you think that they're not getting through?
So we are actually quite impressed by how speedy and how effective the interventions by governments have been in the phase of the Great Lockdown. We have put out an annex to the World Economic Outlook with fiscal perspectives, and we have an online document that reviews policies followed by more than 50 countries. What we see is unprecedented action. We see $11 trillion of measures. Many of those measures are measures with above-the-line impact on the budget that have been crucial to support firms, to support households. Now, the situation is very difficult. We face radical uncertainty, and the first priority is public health. The first priority is to control the epidemic. Why? Because only by controlling the epidemic are we going to be able to reduce uncertainty and so to create conditions for the economy to pick up in a sustainable way, for investment to pick up, and for the transition to a new model of sustainable and inclusive growth to take hold. So we're not out of the woods yet. A lot remains to be done, but up to now, the ability of governments to deliver timely, targeted, and temporary measures have been quite impressive.
Vitor, fantastic to get your thoughts on a program today. Appreciate your time, always valuable to us. Vitor Gaspar there of the IMF. Tom, this is about fiscal authorities acting counter-cyclically when we need them to. And quite clearly, many governments, many economies have that luxury, including the United States and elsewhere. Europe's a different story. Ask Italy if they can continue to act counter-cyclically unless they come up with a mechanism to share the debt load in Europe. That's where it gets complex and difficult. That's why it's such a crucial month ahead.
I mean, Vitor Gaspar, folks, is a public official who has to finesse the message for, I believe it's 181 countries. But, John, you are absolutely dead on that on a game, and we can talk to Ilarion about this in the next hour, on a game theory basis, you can't look at it as a homogenous fiscal structure. There's all these individual stories that lead to unique and great challenges, whether it's about their economics or their financial structure as well, Italy being one of the real challenges forward. John, what I find important here of the IMF's work is they are absolutely authoritative within the fiscal monitor of the dynamics between markets and economics. And those dynamics now, John, they're shockingly fragile.
Those dynamics will be loud and clear for politicians in a couple of weeks' time, Lisa, over in Europe as they try and construct the next moves. And this market has become increasingly optimistic over allocating capital to Europe. But if there is not an agreement on the fiscal front on both sides of the Atlantic over the next couple of weeks, we could have some real trouble.
Yeah, the 750 million euro plan that was put out there, this idea that it will get passed and it will create a new, closer tied Europe. There is a question also, not all stimulus is equal, right? I mean, this is something I'm struggling with, John, that people talk about, the more you spend, the better. And yet the composition of those plans very much in the focus in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. And it really depends on how quickly the economy is going to grow. Are they going to go to companies? Are they going to go to individuals? Are we going to get more enhanced unemployment benefits? The composition matters in terms of inflation, in terms of consumer spending, and in terms of potential growth, John.
Yeah, and the struggle to normalise seems to be the big issue right now worldwide. A bumpy road ahead. In your equity market at the moment, we are down by 9-10 points on the S&P 500, down around about 1/3%. Just to breathe some life into the market check for you, let me get elsewhere, cross-asset worldwide. In Europe, huge story about allocating capital to the European equity market. If you do that, of course, you are turning your back on Big Tech America, and Big Tech America has performed in a big way over the last month. Just compare and contrast the NASDAQ 100 to the performance of an equal-weighted S&P 500 over the last month, and it is stark. That spread is wide, wide, wide. In the Treasury market, 10-year yields come down 3 basis points. We break 60 basis points. Yields have been so sticky over the last couple of weeks, and then we break lower in the last week or so. Down about 8 or 9 basis points on a week on a session, down 3. Your yield 0.586%. And in foreign exchange, to round things out for you, a snapshot of G10. The dollar weaker against the stronger euro. Euro dollar advancing on a difficult Friday morning with a ton of cross currents we'll continue to explore. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now let's see what else is going on around the world. Here were the latest headlines is Michael Barr. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Tom. President Trump is set to visit South Florida for a briefing on drug trafficking. But with Florida's COVID-19 infection rate continuing to skyrocket, others want the president to clarify his push for schools to reopen in the fall or risk losing funding. Superintendent of Miami-Dade County Public Schools, Dr. Alberto Cavaro, criticized the president's decision.
The return to physical schooling under the current health threat, and quite frankly, considering the White House's own reopening plan, which declares that during phase one, physical schooling cannot take place.
New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy hinted at tax increases for the next fiscal year, saying the state will need revenue raisers to balance the budget and recover from the pandemic. The $7.6 billion stopgap budget Murphy enacted through September 30th contained no new taxes. Speaking to Bloomberg, Murphy says that won't be the case for the fiscal 2021 budget, and he also called for federal assistance.
There's no state that has enough money to do what we're going to need to do, not just in education, but across the board. So we need, and I would say desperately, not just blue states, not just in the states that have big legacy challenges in terms of structural deficits, but states across the country are in desperate need for direct federal cash assistance.
Tropical Storm Faye has slightly picked up speed as it moves closer to land along the Atlantic coast. Forecasters decrease projections for rain, totals, and flooding. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, followed by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. With the Bloomberg Business of Sports Report, I'm Michael Barr. The Ivy League canceled sports competition for the upcoming semester because of health and safety concerns about the coronavirus pandemic, becoming the first Division I conference in the U.S. to scrap football. The conference includes Harvard University, Yale University, and Princeton University. The league's executive director, Robin Harris, says no decision has been made about competition in the winter or spring terms, including whether or not we can move fall sports into the spring. The producer of the TV broadcast of La Liga, Spain's top flight soccer league, received a boost to its liquidity after reaching an agreement with banks and shareholders. Joy Media, owner of audiovisual group Media Pro, pulled an extra 110 million euros or $125 million via a loan with its relationship with banks and a commitment from its shareholders to raise capital. And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports report. I'm Michael Barr.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, makes innovation happen. NJIT faculty mentored Christoph Camacho when he was a student, helping him co-found a startup and patent a device that uses drone technology for reforestation and to collect valuable data for land management.
I founded Paratrees back in 2016, taking what I learned from my research at NJIT and migrating it to a startup. Our technology is to really enhance land management operations, so we work very closely with land management companies. So we have a drone that performs precision reforestation, and we do storm damage assessment, having access to drones that can collect data so it's much faster. And what is more important, we help them drive management decisions. NJIT has been there every step of the way, going full force with my company.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Global news.
For the friendships, for the fresh air, for the space to grow.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we close our three positions on Japanese yen at price 106.850. Let's see how much profit we got. Okay. Let's see, from top 107 we sold at 107.485. Stop. Profit 6,350 pounds. Okay, this is profit goes to this position from here down to here. Let's see another profit. Profit 300 290 pounds. Let's make it bigger. Okay. This profit goes to this position from here to here. Okay, and we have a loss on our last position, this one. We have lost 3,290 pounds. Let's make it red because it was lost. Yeah. All right. So that's it. This is how we trade. So let's see. Goes from here to here. Let's see total profit. How much we make? So 6,300 pounds. We plus 3,190 pounds and minus 1,290 pounds. Sorry, there is a mistake. Profit 420 pounds. Okay. All right. So total profit will be £6,480. This is how we trade. Total profit £6,480. So don't be afraid to hold your positions overnight, because it might be profitable for you, right? So let's do like this. So here we'll just point for people who are not following at this moment, at least when they will switch on this session, they will see why and how we made this money. Okay, this is all I wanted to say right now. So keep watching, keep follow, and if you want to buy the strategy, you can see on the screen, on our ticker screen, you can see the address for our strategy. Otherwise, you can follow our trades, you can copy them, they are live. So these trades are not recorded, nothing, we don't do things like that. Okay, enjoy.
The rampant level of coronavirus that we're seeing in those states, remains to be seen. Disney's supposed to open, Disney Orlando is supposed to open tomorrow. Obviously new rules, but that's what's happening. It's the Florida beaches, it's western states with national parks. We're seeing a lot of outdoor activities.
All right, Helene, so given the fact that we're not expecting to see demand for international or business pick up to the levels that we'd seen earlier in the year until perhaps 2025, according to industry projections, how many airlines do you think have to go out of business to right-size, to sort of correct the oversupply of seats and flights that we have currently in the market?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think the way the government set it up in the short term is none of the airlines will go out of business, but the amount of capacity that will come out of the network, so we've said between 800 and 1,000 aircraft will not have been parked and will not come back. After let's say by this time next year. So when you think about the level of capacity, that's equal to the size of one full airline.
Helene, give me buy, hold, sell here. Give me the single best idea 3 years, 5 years out. Which management's going to be most opportunistic and add shareholder value when we get through this tragedy?
Yeah, so Southwest is probably our best idea in the short term, just because they've got net cash. They're really well positioned. They did a huge cash grab earlier this year, about $13 billion worth of liquidity. They've paid down their 364-day term loan. We think they're really well positioned to get share in every recession since I've covered this group, which is more than 3 decades, and they've grown share. So I think that's like our number one idea. Our big contrarian idea, the one that we get a lot of pushback on, is American, because we don't think they're going out of business. They've raised a ton of cash. They still have some assets that they can raise. They don't have any debt due before 2022. They paid down their 364-day term loan that was due next year, so they're not in bad shape right now. And so I think those would be one very contrarian and kind of out there, and the other more of a quote-unquote safety idea.
Very contrarian, given the borrowing costs. Helene, I always enjoy catching up with you. Fantastic to get your insights on this program. Helene Becker there of Cowen. And Helene is always so compassionate about the workers that make up some of these companies. This industry is really going to struggle, Tom, for a long, long time. We talked yesterday, Tom, about the 2 shocks to the global economy. The first shock is the Alerian sudden stop, so to speak, the shutdown to the economy. The second shock, just the persistent nature of being below capacity for an extended period of time. And companies have gone through 2 phases. Phase 1 was to raise capital, and we're already seeing phase 2 decisions, and quite early as well, Tom. The big, permanent, long-term cuts, the job cuts. You're seeing it at the airlines too.
Well, we're seeing it in the job cuts, to my first question to Ms. Becker, but John, far more importantly, I would suggest the struggle of so many industries up against technology and up against demographics was before the pandemic. I'm certain we can't just blame this on the pandemic. These are challenges that were embedded years ago.
People would line up to tell you, Tom, that what the pandemic has done is accelerate existing trends. And I think many people would agree with you and that sentiment. In this market right now, futures do turn just a little bit lower. We're down 14 points on the S&P 500, off by 0.4%. On your equity market, your global economy, up next on this program, Jim Paulson of Leuthold Whedon. A conversation on this equity market you don't want to miss. On the week, mega cap tech stocks absolutely ripping. This is Bloomberg.
Asset managers who sees change.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
We're all guilty of spending too much time on social media. Why not add something genuinely useful to your feed with TuneIn? Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn about some of the best stuff happening around the app. You might just discover your next audio obsession.
Looking to freshen up your listening on TuneIn? Head to the homepage to discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game. from rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
This is Mike Golic Jr. from ESPN's Golic and Wingo. Every morning, Wingo, Dad, and I sit down and discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golic and Wingo to start listening today.
To help keep you and your loved ones safe, TuneIn has the latest guidelines from the CDC. Outdoor gatherings, wash your hands and don't touch your face. Stay at least 6 feet from people you don't live with. Wear a mask. Don't share food, toys, or other items, and avoid shared surfaces. Participate in events like these infrequently. For the latest stories and updates on COVID-19, search Coronavirus News on TuneIn.
Want to get all your college sports news in one place? Turn on the Yahoo Sports College podcast to hear experts Dan Wetzel, Pat Forty, and Pete Thamel break down the latest NCAA stories from the football field to the basketball court and beyond.
I think Reggie should do a video of him running to Heritage Hall and front flipping in. Remember that famous front flip in the end zone that he did? Wasn't he the one who made that popular?
I think he
was.
I think he was, yeah. Search Yahoo College Sports Podcast on TuneIn to listen.
Where do hockey and pop culture coexist?
So let me get this straight. You would be able to name more people nostalgically than currently? This doesn't
Come on.
That's
crazy. I know.
Other podcast Puck Soup NHL analyst Greg Wyshynski, Sean McAdoo, and Ryan Lambert chase the conversational biscuit up and down the ice, skating between serious discussion on what's happening in pro hockey to irreverent opinions on movies, fast food, and life in general. Search Puck Soup on TuneIn to listen.
We always talk about the losers in a trade war.
You benefit if you're just further away from China.
So that you can too.
What are the ramifications if she crumbles or doesn't crumble?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
No one at this point, analysts, companies, strategists, portfolio managers, has a great sense for what earnings will be in 2020 or in 2021.
We're in this very strange situation where the separation side of the labor market is still bad. The claims really only tell us about half the story.
Let's not confuse bounce with recovery.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz.
Good morning, everyone. Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Tom Keene. A Friday in July, and for this nation, coast to coast, with the president traveling to Florida, it is about the pandemic. And, of course, the market reaction to that, as John Farrow mentioned earlier, we've seen yields, remarkable stability in that pricing of the global financial system. And over the last 3-4 days, it ebbs away mathematically, just brilliant, and then bam, in the last 48 hours, we have seen yields come in with a bid to bills, notes, and bonds. There's no question, John, all of our conversations, including Dr. Alarian and Mr. Paulson in this hour, have to be about what those bond yields signal.
And Tom, it's not a huge move, but it's a break. It's been so sticky for the last several weeks on a 10-year Treasury, and then we break lower by several basis points and breach 60 basis points all over again. I say look to real yields, which have really moved aggressively lower over the last several weeks. So Treasuries on the one hand, Tom. On the other, dollar yen. Dollar yen has closed out every single month going back to February with a 107 handle. This morning, 106. Tom, they're not huge moves, but we're starting to break down in a way that maybe isn't complementing people's risk appetite elsewhere.
And John, totally on the point of real yields was Daniel Katzev yesterday of BNP Paribas. I mean, I don't think people understand there's that visible yield, folks, and then there's the yield after you adjust for inflation, and business has trouble getting done with those low real yields.
Tom, you take the nominal, you strip out inflation expectations, and you get a deeply, deeply lower real yield in America. What does all that mean? Well, it means gold. Gold gets a really firm bid, and that's what we've seen. The opportunity cost of holding gold with real yields where they are right now, gone, Tom. That story doesn't exist anymore, which is why we've seen gold get a real lift over the last several months.
Up $10 today, 1820 a print this week, up near that 1880-ish level we saw in 2011. Lisa, all this redounds back to the news event of the corporate world this week, and that would be Mr. Buffett taking out with Berkshire Hathaway Dominion Resources midstream. Lisa, within your reading as we get ready for this weekend, can we assume you see a building M&A business?
It depends how much confidence there is in the CFO suite, right? I mean, this has been sort of a perennial question. These companies have cash if they're big and if they can sustain this downturn, but do they have the conviction to spend it at a time when you do have such low bond yields and such low growth prospects ahead? This conviction seems to be lacking in a lot of executive headquarters. So this to me is something I'm watching, is the sentiment.
Well, we welcome all of you on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television across this nation. We're waiting for a tropical storm in New York, not a hurricane, but really, dark clouds and like it's going to rain for 3 days. And that brings up the biblical proportions of where we stand right now. No one has studied the cycles of this like Jim Paulson at Luthold Whedon. He's really a student of melding economics into the history of our financial system and the opportunities to take and the minefields to avoid. Jim Paulson joins us now from his Minnesota. Jim Paulson, the courage to be in the market now, as Lisa mentions, the confidence of the CFO. How do you develop confidence to participate in anything except Amazon and Apple?
Yeah, it seems like that on some days, Tom. I really think that in some ways, this is a very, unique situation we're in. There's no doubt about that. But in some ways, it's also very common to what it feels like at the start of other new expansions and new bull markets. There's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of problems on Main Street. A lot of them seem like they're going to last for a long time, and they probably will. But yet that's the same kind of situation that existed like in 1982 when the market first took off, or in 2009 when it first took off. There was a lot of doubt there, too, and the market went up, and it seemed like it was disconnected from the reality that was going on Main Street in both of those cases. And yet, against that wall of fear with massive policy support that we had in 82 and we had in 2009, the market kept rising, and eventually economic conditions on Main Street also improved. It took a long time before we got back to normal. We had elevated unemployment rates well into the late 80s, well into the last expansion. We never really got back to the unemployment rate again until many, many years later. So, we've got a lot of issues today, but I still think we're in a new expansion and a new bull market.
Jim, I hear this argument a lot. In fact, I think you're closely aligned with the thoughts of Morgan Stanley that this is normal. The reopening, the recession playbook, it stands. People, as you know, Jim, are pushing back. They'll say there's a structural ceiling to how quickly we can normalize. It's stop-start. It's different. It's not normal. What's your message for them?
Well, I think that, there's certainly differences at every time, and we've got a big difference here, John. I totally agree with that. We've not ever had a pandemic that I've been, studied before, and it does have unique characteristics. But, there's been unique characteristics in the past. There was start-stop in the 2009 recovery, too. I mean, we had massive bank failures and brokerage firm failures. And, our banking system was totally challenged. Sometimes that looked a little better. Sometimes it looked a little worse. In the early 80s, we had basically a depression in energy and agriculture in my home state of Iowa. Commodity deflation. That was a lot of start and stop there, too. I don't know if the specific thing is unique to today, but in reality, it's pretty common to the past. The real key here is you don't have to get back to normal before security prices move. They've already moved long before we're back to normal, and they'll probably continue to do that. If we can just trend northward in terms of economics, I think that's going to be sufficient, even if it's slow and even if it's start and stop.
Well, let's say it's slow and it's start and stop. Let's talk about what you want to own. The rotation into the cyclical areas of this market worked for about 5 minutes and then really stalled through the month of June. Jim, with the backdrop right now that we're facing, with a week where the dominance of mega cap tech is back on top, how uncomfortable does it feel to pivot away from that story and back to value again, back to the cyclical areas of this market?
I'd own both, John. I'd own the barbell. I'd continue to own new era growth, and I would continue to add exposure in what I'd say the broader market, which to me is cyclical small caps and internationals. And I really think on the one hand that there's greater participation going on here than advertised. Yes, it's been a narrower market since the June 8th top here. But from the March 23rd low, the Russell 2000 index, the equally weighted S&P 500, and the market cap weighted S&P 500 are all had risen by about 40%. So there is greater participation here still going on. It may not be every week, but I think if right now we got a bearish attitude towards pandemic and reopenings, if that turns back to bullishness again, I think we'll see the broader market pick up. In the meantime, your high growth equities are going to continue to do well. I don't really see a bubble in growth like I saw in 2000. I mean, right now in tech, for example, the forward multiple on S&P 500 tech's 27 times. It was 55 times in 2000. Right now, the relative P multiple is 1.1 times the S&P. It was 2 times the S&P. And the reason that people are buying those stocks today is not because they're out over their skis with massive, bullishness. It's because of defensiveness. They're buying those stocks like they used to buy utility stocks. Right.
Well,
and
Jim, this has sort of been the argument by a lot of big investors that basically big tech are the stalwarts and are the utilities going forward. On the other hand, if you take a look at who is buying, retail investors are accounting for a greater proportion of total volumes in the equity market in the United States. The head of execution for Citadel coming out yesterday and saying at any given day, there is 1/5 of all trading activity attributed to these retail investors, which have traditionally been thought of as the dumb money. Do you agree, or do you think that they're smarter than the institutions that are being more reticent to pile in?
Well, I guess that's yet to be determined. I don't believe that the size of the retail run to me is of a magnitude, I think, that's concerning, like it might have been in earlier periods. And I also don't know, Lisa, who knows, but I also don't think it's backed by rabid bullishness and optimism. I think there are people that were looking and using these growth stocks as defensive investments. Now, whether that's going to prove to be accurate, I don't know, but it's not something we've done in the past. When we've had this concentrated run into these big cap tech stocks in the past, it's been a signal of over bullishness, and that just is not evident to me today.
The character of that sector has really changed. Hey, Jim, fantastic to catch up with you, sir, as always. Jim Paulson there of Luthold, Whedon. Tom Keene, it has been so tough to keep up with the rally of some of these single names. The mega cap tech story has been unbelievable. To think the NASDAQ 100 has delivered the same gains this year as long treasuries. TLT, that ETF, up around about 23% apiece year to date. But the single name story, Tom, and keeping up with the rally we've seen has just been tough for the whole of the South Side.
There's no question about that. Dennis Gartman hitting the ball out of the park on gold and yen and in euro as well. But, John, Jason Bassinet at Citigroup really upping 3550 on Amazon. It's a beautiful research note about the expansion of e-commerce. And, of course, Doug Cass has been out on Amazon 5000 way down the road.
It's been a beautiful rally as well for the people that have held that name through the year so far. 18 minutes away from the opening bell, 1 hour, 18 minutes away, 18 minutes away from catching up with Mohammed Al-Arian of Bloomberg Opinion and of Allianz. That's coming up next, coming up later on this show. This is Bloomberg.
Now Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, thank you very much. President Trump is set to visit South Florida for a briefing on drug trafficking. But with Florida's COVID-19 infection rate continuing to skyrocket, others want the president to clarify his push for schools to reopen in the fall. The president spoke about that during a Rose Garden ceremony.
Open our schools. Stop this nonsense. We open our schools.
Washington Governor Jay Inslee says President Trump is the last person in America who should be giving their opinion when it comes to the coronavirus. Governor Inslee says the president's threats to withhold funding from states that don't reopen schools in the fall are, quote, hogwash.
They have tried to bully us into making decisions that are not best for the state of Washington, and we know this. Decisions about school and how to have it on site or otherwise will remain with the state of Washington.
The sudden death of Seoul's mayor, reportedly implicated in a sexual harassment complaint, has caused an outpouring of public sympathy. Park Won-soon was found dead on a wooded hill in northern Seoul early today, about 7 hours after his daughter reported to police that he had left her a will-like verbal message and then left home. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong. Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing, LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Influential conversations from...
For the friendships, for the fresh air, for the space to grow, for the knowledge, for the sport, for the outdoor education, for the wide horizons, for the academic excellence, for the future. Unleash your child's education at West Buckland School, a co-educational day and boarding school in beautiful North Devon. If you're moving to the Southwest for a better quality of life, this is education without compromise in what the Good Schools Guide called a gem of a school in an exceptional location. To see for yourself, find us at westbuckland.com.
Listen, that's a dream. Everyone has them, jingling away in the back of our minds. And most of the time, that's where dreams stay. So easy to ignore. Anything can drown them out, and everything does. But at Honda, we listen to our dreams. We get right up close. And on really good days, they become reality. From 2022, Honda's mainstream cars will only be hybrid or electric. Honda, the power of dreams.
concerned about too low inflation than too high inflation. The epidemic has boosted precautionary savings. Investment will be prudent, and so for a while we are going to have a situation where savings exceeds investment.
Vitor Gaspar there of the International Monetary Fund on this program around about 1 hour ago on the need for more fiscal stimulus, with fiscal authorities in Europe and the United States very much in focus for the month ahead. From New York this morning, good morning. Alongside Tom Keene and Lisa Abramowitz, I'm Jonathan Ferro. 1 hour and 12 minutes away from your opening bell, with equity futures just a little damper, softer, lower, off by 0.6%, down by 19 points. As Tom touched on through the program and through Bloomberg surveillance over the last several hours, Treasury yields breaking lower over the last couple of days. We're down another 3 basis points on 10s to 0.58%, on 30s down 6 basis points to about 126, and a couple of bond auctions through the week, Tom, from the Treasury that have gone really well on 10s and 30s as well. That's in the United States. Over in Japan, we had a JGB 30-year issue. Those yields are low, and demand is still there for bonds with yields this low, Tom.
Yeah, no question about it. On this Friday, folks, what we're doing is we had Helene Becker on in the airlines. That was a stunning conversation. And now we do it on housing. Jack Machenko's out of FBR and Lehman and is with Susquehanna Financial, where he is definitive on the home builders. And in this crisis, that is a good conversation. Jack, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg Surveillance today. How are the home builders reacting? The Pulte Group, the Hortons, the Toll Brothers, how are they reacting? How are they responding to this economic slowdown and pandemic?
Good morning, Tom, and thanks for having me. I think one of the big surprises in the first half of 2020 has really been the rebound in demand for housing. And, going into February, the market was really red hot. We spent a lot of time in the field in the early months of the year looking at trying to get an early read on spring. And by all means, the new home construction market was very, very strong. And then we went into that late March, was basically shut down for 4, 6, 8 weeks. And I think the surprise is a lot of that demand has rebounded. Now, it's really being driven by a couple things. I think first and foremost, you're seeing more and more first-time buyers in the market. And so one of the things the builders are doing, to your point, is they're building lower-priced homes. And if you are building lower-priced homes, you're seeing net better demand than if you were seeing higher-priced homes along, say, the coast. So you talk about a Toll Brothers versus a D.R. Horton. You're also seeing, and this is a bit of a surprise, you're seeing a lot of demand for spec. Normally spec tends to, builders want to manage their spec inventory because it's hard to build a house to suit someone's needs when you don't have the buyer in mind. But it seems like in the first half of the year, the builders are actually seeing pricing power on spec, which to me shows a sign of urgency. And I think when you pull that together, I think the lack of supply on the existing side, I think a resilient demand profile, you've got a demographic tailwind where a lot of these older millennials are now moving into their first home or looking at their first home. I think you've got some acceleration or pull forward because rates are low, money's cheap. So people are saying, well, if I was going to move 2 years ago, let's just go ahead and do it now. People want to get out of apartments because of the whole COVID situation. And so that's where you really seen a lot of the strength year to date. So, for example, like Lennar, the first 2 weeks of June for Lennar, their business was up 20% over June 2019. Not March or April when the pandemic had shut everything down. That's pre-pandemic. So, I was talking to a CFO of a public builder a few weeks ago, and we were talking about this very point. He said, look, 85% of people still are working. And so, we focus on the 15%, the composition of the unemployment, but, there is a real demand story out there. And I think the supply piece, right, people don't want people coming in their homes. So existing supply has actually gone down further. A lot of the existing supply on the entry-level side has been mopped up by these single-family rental companies. And so the builders are really filling the need for that first-time product.
Jack, and we definitely are seeing this in lumber futures, which have risen 85% since April 1st. I'm looking right now, they're the highest since 2018. There's a question, though, this is just pent-up demand that's being unleashed in the market, but that will dry up. And you say that there are a lot of people still employed, but increasingly some of these larger companies, United Air, Wells Fargo, you name it, are planning job cuts going forward. How much could housing prices decline on a whole, given the fact that we are going to see this employment pressure continue?
It all gets back to the supply demand. Right now, we're not looking for large nationwide declines in home prices at all because of this imbalance to the demand side. Now, on the demand side, to your point, as we begin to see maybe hourly unemployment or service industry employment drift into more white-collar employment, we see stress there. One of the things we're looking at real closely is, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, California, Washington State, they went into lockdown earlier. They seem to put a cap or flatten the curve, if you will. What we're worried about is places like Phoenix, San Antonio, Orlando. These are big home building markets, and the per capita infection rates aren't where they are on the coasts yet, but they're growing very quickly. And so when you see that, you worry that unemployment may be more centered on those kind of locations. And so we're kind of in a holding pattern right now. I do think there was a degree of pull forward. You had basically an 8-week pause period in the spring season. You probably caught some of that up. Look, you definitely got some people coming out of rentals and wanting to, have a home and that sort of thing. It's hard to even know how much that is. There's some of that. You've got some migration. The migration from high cost to low cost has been going on for a couple of years. That accelerates a little bit in this environment. But I do think, the June numbers that we're seeing in the builders, is still maybe a little bit overstated because of that pull forward issue. But to specifically your question, as long as supply remains in excess of demand, and supply on the existing side is running half, 60% of what it was, a year ago, or even in a normalized supply-demand market. So it's going to have to get really, really turn the other way, where demand completely collapses for us to see real home price declines. And remember, too, forbearance. Forbearance is a big deal.
Hey, Jack.
Yes.
We've got to leave it there, unfortunately. Great to catch up with you and get your thoughts on this market. Jack Misenko there of Susquehanna on the housing market. We'll pick up the pace. Up next on the program, we'll catch up with Mohammed Al-Arian of Bloomberg Opinion and the Chief Economic Advisor to Allianz as well. In your bond market, that's where the story is over the last couple of days. We break lower on 10-year Treasury yields, down by 4 basis points to 0.576%. From New York, this is Bloomberg.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
Debbie Hart is president of BioNJ, which represents the interests of more than 400 New Jersey-based biotech companies. She's also a strong voice in the biotech sector, supporting research universities like New Jersey Institute of Technology. She sees NJIT as a valuable partner in attracting venture capital and biotech startups to the Garden State.
So the number one reason the companies come here to New Jersey for the biotech industry is for our talent. We estimate that there were about 30 biotech companies in the early 90s in New Jersey, about 80 in 1998. Today there are more than 400. And that growth continues, and it's come from every possible angle. Other countries, other states, they've spun out of our academic institutions as well as our biotech and our pharma companies, and we expect that growth to continue long into the future. And NJIT is a pipeline for talent, for companies, for entrepreneurs to do that important work.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
For the friendships, for the fresh air, for the space to grow, for the knowledge, for the sport, for the outdoor education, for the wide horizons, for the academic excellence, for the future. Unleash your child's education at West Buckland School, a co-educational day and boarding school in beautiful North Devon. If you're moving to the southwest for a better quality of life, this is education without compromise in what the Good Schools Guide called a gem of a school in an exceptional location. To see for yourself, find us at westbuckland.com.
In line with government guidelines, face coverings are now compulsory on public transport. At Asda, you can get a 4-pack of Prima disposable face coverings for £2.80, or a 2-pack of washable face coverings from £2.50. Asda, we're all in this together. Selected stores subject to availability.
When you're facing a problem, like how to make an electric car more efficient, you could sit down and talk it through. But at Honda, we decided to listen to the wind tunnel. With wing mirrors? Or without?
Yes.
With?
No.
Without?
Yes.
With?
No.
Without?
Yes.
Or with cameras instead of wing mirrors?
Sweet.
The new Honda E with wing cameras, not mirrors, because we listen to the wind. Honda, the power of dreams.
From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance for our audience worldwide. We're live on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tom Keene, together with Lisa Abramowitz. I'm Jonathan Ferro. 1 hour away from the cash open with equity futures down 19 on the S&P 500. We are off by 0.6%. That's the equity market. Here's the bond market for you. Treasuries firmer, yields lower, down 4 basis points on 10s to 0.57%, down 6 basis points on a 30-year yield, 125 on a 30-year Treasury, Tom Keene. And the auctions have been really clean, really firm, really tidy, not just in the United States and Japan too. Worldwide, yields might be low, but demand is still really resilient.
There's no question about it, John, and all of these market indicators signal unusual times that we are living in the great uncertainty of where we'll be down the road. Someone who's codified this with the phrase T decisions, John, is our next guest. This idea of the many binomial T decisions that we're going to make, black or white decisions we're going to make down the road in this society and in our families, in our investments. It's going to be just extraordinary what we're going to see in 2022 and indeed 2032. John?
Really fortunate to be joined on the program now by Mohammed Al-Arian, Chief Economic Advisor to Allianz and, of course, Bloomberg opinion columnist. Mohammed, we've been following this crisis over the last several months together, and it just feels like we're entering something different, a new phase. There's a shift here. What are your thoughts on it?
There is, John, and it's really happening in the economy in the U.S., and that is a migration up of layoffs from small and medium-sized companies to larger ones. And that's consequential both for what it says about the demand side, but also what it says about the supply side, and that is a lot of businesses are not buying into the V. They see a different destination regardless of the journey.
Dr. Al-Arian, Warren Buffett made a T decision this week to invest in a distressed asset. I think what's missing in our analysis on a Friday in July is how businesses, how executives will respond. What are the T decisions CEOs, CFOs, and big money is going to make over the next year?
So for most businesses, it really comes down to 3 issues. Is my balance sheet strong enough? A. B, what is demand and revenue going to look like? And C, what is my cost structures going to look like? For the marketplace, there's a really interesting aspect going on because the marketplace has to also incorporate two things. One is the very heavy hand of policy. And secondly, are technicals that have proven very strong but remain delicate. So it's a really interesting configuration that we're going to be talking about for a long time, Tom, going forward. But the basic issue is that there's much more fluidity out there, economic and financial, and of course health-wise, than we've seen for a very long time.
Mohammed, what is it about the technicals that you think are delicate right now?
So I think what you have is the extension of what has been the FOMO trade, the TINA trade, and the fear of missing out because central banks are our best friends. The TINA, there is no alternative but stocks, but certain stocks within that have become both defensive and growth at the same time. And that has attracted a lot more interest from the retail side. And the retail side has had quite an influence in the last month or so. You know, John, I think more retail participation is very important. It broadens the marketplace, and importantly, it means society buys into a market-based system even more. However, you don't want retail to be the victim of a head fake, and that's what I really worry about.
Victim of a head fake. Another way to say this is a bubble. That's what Rob Arnott of Research Affiliates called the tech stocks, the valuations right now there. Do you agree?
So I think that there's two issues of the head fake. One is to be careful that central bank support does not go all the way down to defaulting companies. Defaults imply capital impairment. And the experience with Hertz, where should be one that should be put front and center of every retail investor. The second element relates to Rob Arnott's really good interview with you yesterday, which is there is a time when the marketplace thinks in relative terms, and there's a time when it thinks in absolute terms. In relative terms, tech makes absolute sense. They have strong balance sheet, positive cash flow, good management, and on the sunny side of both the COVID journey and what's on the other side of the COVID journey. But in absolute terms, look at the valuations. And what I have learned in my experience in the marketplace is that the market can be obsessed with relative values for a very, very long time, and then almost overnight it shifts to absolute. And that moment can be quite a jarring moment if you don't realize where you are on valuations.
Right. And Mohammed, you've done this with Bill Gross at PIMCO. You know, Bill Gross had his famous Monroe Trader on his desk where you're quoting yield, 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 and all of a sudden you go from relative to absolute, and all you're worried about is price, price, price. How close are we in the bond market with where nominal yields are, real yields are, and negative yields are to you flipping from a yield analysis to a price analysis to protect capital?
So a lot depends on which part of the bond market. And I think it's really important to distinguish, Tom. And let me start with a story that was often told at PIMCO, which is the person who comes home and says, look, I bought a dog for $30,000. And his wife says, are you crazy? You spent $30,000 for a dog? And he answers, yeah, great deal. The cat was selling for $40,000. Right? There's a point at which relative trades don't make sense. I think you're going to see this in high yield. You're going to see this in emerging market corporates. You're going to see that in certain sovereign emerging markets. You're not going to see it higher up in the capital structure because central banks have and will continue to influence those yields and those spreads. So people have got to be much more careful into how they treat the bond market. It is very different when you get near default risk.
Mohammed, you've got to be careful, otherwise people listening to this might think that people at PIMCO actually bought $30,000 dogs, and I'm sure that maybe that wasn't the case. Mohammed, you mentioned EM a couple of times then.
They certainly didn't. PIMCO is and always has been a very fundamental-driven shop.
Right. John, I paid $32,000 for vet bill. I'm sorry.
Which is why you call him Vet Bill, I'm sure, because of the cost, Tom. Mohammed, you mentioned EM a couple of times there, didn't you? And I just think that it wasn't by accident. Are you concerned about the valuations in emerging markets?
I am. I think people don't realize how tough it is for the typical emerging market. Phase one was simply dealing with the spillover from what was happening in China, what was happening in Europe and the US, which is lower exports, lower commodity prices, lower tourism, lower foreign direct investment. Phase two is dealing with their own COVID outbreaks. If you look at what's happening in Latin America, it is tragic. If you're looking at parts of what's happening in Africa, it is tragic. So the demand on their resources and the need to divert more resources to the health care system is just going to go up. And I think that people don't realize that there is, to quote my colleagues at Gramercy, a paradigm of non-payments coming up for certain emerging market credits.
A paradigm of non-payments, the idea that perhaps some of the sovereign debt could get written down, and we've seen some of that from the IMF so far. Where are we in that? How much do you think the sovereign debt of developing markets could get written down ultimately?
So we've seen ongoing with Ecuador, with Argentina, that's market-based solutions. Like you say, we've seen the IMF and the World Bank work with the G20 on a debt service suspension initiative for the poorest countries, and they've made it very clear that they expect burden sharing. The issue is, as you know, Lisa, it is not easy to dictate burden sharing from a top-down perspective, and that's where the IMF and the World Bank are struggling in finding a way for private sector involvement, as they call it, PSI. I think it's going to come. I think when countries go from immediate emergency assistance to wanting longer-term support from these institutions, one of the requirements is going to be burden sharing. And I don't think creditors quite realize that that's going to migrate up from the lowest income countries to some, not all, some of the middle income emerging markets as well.
Mohammed, when people say burden sharing right now, we think of Europe and the fiscal talks that are set to take place later this month. You have really pushed back over the last year, maybe longer, when people have come on programs like this and talked about pivoting away from America and American assets towards Europe and the continent. What's the pushback now?
So I think we're getting closer, John. I think we've learned once again that it takes a crisis to move Europe. And what you're seeing happening in Europe is, I think, an important moment. So I must say that I'm really encouraged by what's going on in Europe right now. It'll be important to see how these negotiations proceed. There are countries that are still resistant, but on the whole, I think they're going to get to a better place. And I told you that the time will come to fade the U.S. in favor of Europe. We're getting much closer to that. I would not fade the U.S. in favor of emerging markets, though.
Mohammed, always appreciate your time. Thank the family for us, won't you? I know it's super early on the West Coast, and this is a disruption for the El-Arian household as well. Mohammed, fantastic to catch up with you, sir. Mohammed El-Arian there of Bloomberg Opinion and, of course, Chief Economic Advisor to Allianz. That decision set, Tom Keene, on that international exposure, one of the key discussions of the past week, I think.
Yeah, we could do a whole nother interview with Dr. El-Arian on this, folks. This harkens back to 1992, as Dr. El-Arian mentioned, Ecuador, and I can't convey enough, John, how the formulas of international distress 30 and 40 years ago are not true today. The financial structure of those countries is totally different than what we saw in the 90s. And as Dr. El-Arian alluded to, there's going to be a huge mystery to the workouts going from the most troubled to the lesser troubled. It's a huge mystery out there for the IMF and all of international banking.
A bit of a bounce in this equity market, Tom. We turned positive very, very briefly on the S&P 500. Futures now down just 3 on the S&P. We're down just 0.1%. In the bond market, to get you up to speed on treasuries, firmer. Yields lower through much of this morning. That's where we stayed down 3 basis points on a 10-year. Gives some of the move up at the very long end of the curve. Your 30-year yield now down by just 4 or 5 basis points. But the yield, unreal, 127 on a US 30-year. From New York City this morning, good morning to you all. Alongside Lisa Abramowitz and Tom Keene, I'm Jonathan Ferro. Live, you're watching Bloomberg TV, you're listening to Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now let's see what else is going on around the world. Here were the latest headlines is Michael Barr. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Tom. Arizona's governor says due to rising COVID-19 numbers, his office will be more prescriptive in its guidance regarding virus control measures moving forward. Governor Doug Ducey said the steadily rising positivity rate in his state is linked to increased economic activity after stay-at-home orders were lifted in May. Ducey says he's issuing an executive order telling restaurants to limit capacity to half of what's normal.
You're safer at home. If you're not at home, you're safer outside. If you're not outside and you are going to go inside, you want to be in places where you can limit the number of people.
Florida, Texas, and California also reported record deaths from the virus. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy hinted at tax increases for next fiscal year, saying the state will need revenue raisers to balance the budget and recover from the pandemic. Murphy spoke to Bloomberg.
We will have to borrow money. This is not either or, it's and both. And we'll probably have to put some revenue raisers on the table as well as we develop our next budget.
The $7.6 billion stopgap budget Murphy enacted through September 30th contained no new taxes. The governor says that won't be the case for the fiscal 2021 budget, which is due to lawmakers on August 25th. Tropical Storm Faye has slightly picked up strength as it moves closer to land, and forecasters decrease projections for rain totals and flooding along the Atlantic coast. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
This is your Bloomberg Real Estate Report. I'm Denise Pellegrini. Miami has been one of the jewels in the crown for real estate. Florida's income tax-free status, plus the fact that Miami is an international city, really give it a boost. In Florida, of course, also a favorite for tourists. Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, though, says the city needs a long-term plan to prevent things from unraveling in the pandemic.
I think people thought, look, we beat it, mission accomplished. And then it's apparent that that's not what happened. And not only did we not, it's back, stronger than before in terms of its spread.
And Suarez, who is also a former real estate lawyer, says we need to have a comprehensive conversation about what to do about the real estate market if COVID-19 gets much worse.
It's not just, people not being able to pay their rent. It's landlords not being able to pay the mortgage. It's banks not getting either, their interest or their principal. This will affect the entire financial system.
And that's your Bloomberg Real Estate Report. I'm Denise Pellegrini.
President of the Jewish Communal Fund, Zoya Raines, and her husband, Robert Friedman, Jewish activists and philanthropists, talk about why they chose the Jewish Communal Fund for their charitable giving.
As very busy working parents, we wanted to focus more on the charity part of it and wanted to focus more on our children and less on the administration.
The Jewish Communal Fund is one of the oldest and largest donor-advised funds, but at the same time, they're totally up to date and have state-of-the-art systems for us to access and manage our contributions online. The assets in our fund at the JCF grow tax-free, so we can generate more charitable dollars to support the charities that we care about most.
Let JCF minimize your taxes and maximize your charitable giving.
We're incredibly passionate about our charity, and the JCF allows us to focus more on the charity and less on the administration and the headaches.
For more information about Jewish Communal Fund, visit our website at jcfny.org.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, new order placed for euro against United States dollar at 112.906. So 112.90.6. The order placed to sell short. So we will see. 9, 6. Okay, let's see.
€2K4/terms.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel, Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school
Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it, and I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
The economic recovery clearly bottomed. I think some good news in our view is that we bottomed a little bit, less down in the United States in terms of the economy. It didn't dip quite as much as we were fearing. But this reopening process is in train, but it is not clear to us at all how this reopening process is going to go.
That was Rob Waldner of Invesco on the reopening process. Some doubt, some uncertainty really coming to the surface in the last month or so. From New York City, good morning to you all. Alongside Tom Keene, together with Lisa Abramovich, I'm Jonathan Ferro. Tom, as I always do, I'll step away to get ready for Bloomberg TV and the Open as we count down to the opening bell. Really looking forward to catching up with Laurie Calvasina of RBC on this market as we get very defensive in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I'm really glad that conversation will happen. And here's why, folks. What we've seen overnight is a reaffirmation of many on the sell side towards those big tech companies. And I really wonder what Ms. Calvasina will say about what do you do between tech, and moving the other way. Jason Bassinet at Citigroup and his team really putting out a street high 3550 on Amazon. Nowhere near where Doug Cass is, but nevertheless, really impressive to see that new price target from Citigroup. Right now, we will switch to the litmus paper of the global system, and that is the foreign exchange market. Mark McCormick has been a great student of this, and we're thrilled that he joins us right now. His years of working at Bloomberg, his ownership of the Bloomberg terminal back when he was out of school, and now global head of FX for TD Bank. We're thrilled that Mark could join us this morning. Mark, the first chart I looked at this morning was Euro-Swissy, that battle of Swiss franc stronger. What do you see? Is it a tradable move in Swiss franc, or is it just more disinflationary noise?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think in terms of Swiss, like Euro-Swiss is probably not the appropriate play. I think, if we're going to think about longer-term FX forecasting, that Euro-Swiss has more upside potential than downside potential over, the next 6 months or the next year.
Right.
But I think when you're thinking about the next trade, I think Swiss yen is really your appropriate benchmark, because what the world is trying to figure out is, in a world where there is demand for safe haven currencies like gold and Swiss and yen, which safe haven crosses are the most kind of mispriced relative to the world right now. And I think Swiss yen is really an interesting trade because it's been mean reverting all throughout COVID. And most of our framework tells us basically that the market's overpositioned and Swissy's a little bit overvalued, and that Swiss yen should be the one trade that you should be thinking about that can move lower, maybe 3% in the next month or so.
It's interesting. A lot of people looking at all of these pairs. And Tom, go ahead. I mean, honestly, get technical. Go toward the Swissy, because I know that is burning and front and center on your mind, Tom. Go ahead.
No, Lisa, to be honest, I was distracted here in New York, folks, by the sirens down below us on Fifth Avenue. There's a zillion sirens going down. That's the nature of doing this from our homes in New York. Excuse me for that. Mark McCormick, I look at the idea of weak Swiss and strong yen. Why should the yen be strong given their pandemic, given the fragility of the Abe government? I mean, why do you call strong yen?
So yen's quite interesting because it defies every single economic rational argument you make for currencies, and it is the one currency that it does everything it wants to do on its own, and largely because it's a function of flows as opposed to fundamentals. And the biggest driver of Japan is, if you look at the balance of payments, the Japanese have been able to push money outside of Japan into other currencies. And I think one of the biggest drivers you have to think about is the relative equity story, the Sharpe ratio of global equities, and whether or not we're going to see deteriorating Sharpe ratios with more uncertainty and more vol. And you also have to look at credit markets. And so what we've seen is that the Japanese balance of payments has deteriorated from a portfolio.
I'm removing order to sell short. Well, it moved too far. Okay, so the order sell short euro removed.
The thing that's happening now is that the 10-year yield differential is now moving in Japan's favor, where a G9 average is only about 40 basis points above the Japanese 10-year. And you add to that story that Japanese pension funds have been basically buying foreign equities and foreign credits throughout this last cycle. If we start to see more volatility in U.S. equities and we see a change in U.S. Political leadership and a change in foreign policy, and we see a shift in the sectors of what's driving the U.S. equity market, that's going to shift the capital flow dynamics back towards Japan. And we might actually see U.S. and foreign investors buying more Japanese-based equities, which again would drive the balance of payments and the portfolio flows in a yen positive direction.
A yen positive direction, perhaps a dollar negative direction? Are you basically calling for more dollar weakness ahead as people look to strength in other parts of the world?
So I would categorize this way. We're trying to kind of time the move appropriately, where our view here is the recovery and the rebound that the world has been so focused on in the last couple of months. There is a very fine transition from that to global reflation. We're not expecting, just because the rebound was better than expected and data surprises are better than expected, that is going to equate to a global reflation environment. So in that backdrop, I think in the next month, we still have another 1 to 2% where the broad dollar consolidates, largely, even though it's counterintuitive, that the U.S. is becoming the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. But the flip side is, if the dollar strengthens off that risk-off potential, that is sowing the seeds for the next big 5 to 10 to 15% move lower in the dollar over the coming year. And I think a lot of it is, the U.S. has had cyclical and structural drivers. The structural drivers have always been dollar negative. It's just the cyclical forces of U.S. equities, U.S. growth, and also some leadership on the rates differential has allowed that to happen. But it's hard to see how the dollar can rally with real interest rates remaining negative over the course of the coming years.
Mark McCormick, brilliant. Thank you so much for TD Bank. Greatly appreciate that strong yen. A really interesting set of flows there to get you to a stronger Japanese yen. The market's really interesting now. Lisa, as we close out this hour, just remarkable to see yields came up, and then PPI really disappointed with a more disinflationary PPI. Ian Lingen with a really smart note. And I would note, Lisa, that yields come in the last 20 minutes just with a new vengeance. The 2-year yield 0.1369. Lisa, that's remarkable.
Yeah, it's clear that pricing power has diminished, and this just sort of edified that idea with the idea of producer prices declining. But if you look under the hood, do you know that meat prices declined by 27% in this reading? I mean, the weakness, the unexpected weakness, Tom, was really driven by a decline in food prices. So a lot behind this we're going to be parsing throughout the day.
Yeah, and some of that in demand as well. I know coffee off a cliff here in the recent weeks, too, just simply on lower demand, all of that part of the pandemic. What we're going to do through the morning is keep you abreast of the markets, and, of course, we'll see if we can continue the tech juggernaut. That seems to be the theme of the week. One theme is a president in the air to Florida, where he will give a fundraiser event. It'll be interesting to see the comments, if we get any, from President Trump. Ian Bremmer in the 12 noon hour. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
Not completing high. Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't, and I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones, and you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Listen, that's a dream. Everyone has them, jingling away in the back of our minds. And most of the time, that's where dreams stay. So easy to ignore. Anything can drown them out, and everything does. But at Honda, we listen to our dreams. We get right up close. And on really good days, they become reality. From 2022, Honda's mainstream cars will only be hybrid or electric. Honda, the power of dreams.
Mike's mother of all marinades.
I love my homemade barbecue marinades. The only problem is no one else does. So today I'm trying something new. Caramelized crispy pork belly tumbled in sea salt, red chili, black pepper and sugar. And sweet sticky chicken fillets in tangy mango, coconut and lime. This is amazing.
Yeah, because you didn't make it. Introducing the new Fire Pit range, exclusively at Tesco. Food Love Stories, brought to you by Tesco. Available in the majority of larger stores while stocks last.
You love tune-in for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Okay, here we go.
With the NFL draft in the books and the schedule set, check out a TuneIn podcast for daily updates on the lead up to the 2020 season. Like the Ringer NFL Show, where a rotating cast of Ringer experts talk with players, coaches, and special guests about the NFL landscape.
A lot of the other teams that we consider...
Or ESPN's NFL Live.
If there are some delays because of the COVID-19...
Search sports on TuneIn to explore these pods and much more. We're all guilty of spending too much time on social media. Why not add something genuinely useful to your feed with TuneIn? Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn about some of the best stuff happening around the app. You might just discover your next audio obsession.
Losers in a trade war.
You benefit if you're just further away from China.
So that you can too.
What are the ramifications if she crumbles or doesn't crumble?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Surveillance Economics.
Certainly, we've got to put a floor under the economic carnage. Markets didn't believe the coronavirus would take down the world economy.
Finance.
The sellers are not necessarily finished, but quite exhausted.
Investment.
That's the reality that we have to settle ourselves to. This is the start of a depression.
We're going to have a bounce back when everything is open. The question is, what is the shape of the economy from there?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Friday morning from New York City and points beyond to our worldwide audience. It is Friday. We made it. U.S. equity futures are off slightly as coronavirus concerns continue to surge in key U.S. states. Treasury rates pull back slightly with the 10-year Treasury at 0.58%. The dollar is modestly higher this morning while WTI crude pulls back below that $40 per barrel level. To get some more color on the equity futures, return to Bloomberg Stocks editor Dave Wilson. Dave, what are you looking at this morning?
Well, when you talk about the virus and the effect on markets, I mean, one stock that jumps out is Gilead Sciences. It's higher by 2.5% in early trading. The drug maker released study data showing the COVID-19 treatment remdesivir reduced the risk of dying from the virus by 62%. This was all presented at a conference, and Gilead allowed to sell remdesivir under what they call an emergency use authorization from U.S. regulators. You've got Netflix Also higher in early trading, up 2.5%. Goldman Sachs raised its 12-month share price estimate for the video subscription service by 24% to $670. The new target is the highest of 37 analysts in a Bloomberg survey. Netflix's second quarter results are due next Thursday. But when you look at why the futures are down, energy stocks are part of that. They're lower along with crude after the International Energy Agency said a resurgence of the coronavirus may derail a recovery in oil demand. ExxonMobil's off 1.5% in early trading. Occidental Petroleum up down 2.5%, and Apache also down 2.5%. United Airlines lower by 4%. The carrier reached a tentative agreement with its pilots union on a proposal to cut jobs. The deal covers voluntary leave programs and an early out plan for senior pilots who are 62 and older. You look across airlines, you see American down 2.5% and Delta lower by 2%. Royal Caribbean's down 1.5%. The cruise line owner took full control of Silver Sea Cruises in exchange for 5.2 million shares. It's about a 2.5% stake. Royal Caribbean had bought 2/3 ownership of Silver Sea 2 years ago. And you look at the other cruise line stocks, you see Carnival lower by 0.5%, Norwegian down 1.5%. Some more stocks that are down, at least one. KeyCorp lower by 2.5%. The regional bank was cut the equivalent of sell from neutral at Bank of America. The firm cited the risk of a dividend cut and a relatively high probability of business loan defaults tied to the coronavirus. Autoliv up 3.5%. The auto parts maker received a buy rating and new coverage at Goldman Sachs. Greenbrier higher by 12.5%. The rail car maker's fiscal third quarter earnings and revenue surpassed analysts' highest estimates in a Bloomberg survey. Now, Greenbrier said Chairman and CEO Bill Furman will retire in September 2022. So we're talking 2 years out. And he'll also extend a cut in his pay until then. And the most active stock in early trading is one of these blank check companies called Spartan Energy Acquisition, the ticker SPAC, SPAQ. It's up 16%. Reuters reported that the company is leading a bidding war for the electric vehicle maker Fisker. The story cited unnamed people familiar with the matter and said both companies declined to comment. Now, today's advance is on top of Spartan Energy's 39% gain yesterday. So people are clearly getting excited about the potential for a deal.
Bloomberg Stocks editor Dave Wilson, thank you so much for that. A busy, busy Friday as we get ready for earnings next week, Tom. We're going to get some of those big banks coming out with earnings, and we're going to get a sense of kind of how cautious they are about the next couple of quarters when we take a look at some of their provisions that they're going to take.
And no question about it, Paul, it'll be the most mysterious set of conference calls ever. It will be, I believe, with the news flow we have, a 4-hour Face the Nation Sunday morning. Margaret Brennan is steeled for it. The news flow, folks, is extraordinary. Just to read across 5 newspapers and see the different takes on the pandemic. I, this morning, looked at the Florida papers and moved from Miami up to a distressed Tampa and over to Orlando, and the absolute surreal idea that the Magic Kingdom will open up. Margaret Brennan, of course, visiting the Magic Kingdom as a child 47 times, so knows a lot about Florida and the tragedy that they're facing as well. Margaret, an open question to start the serious conversation of Face the Nation. Where will you begin Sunday morning?
We will begin with these skyrocketing COVID infections. We have the mayor of Phoenix, who is very worried about what is happening in her city, in her state, is asking for more federal help. We will also have the CEO of Advent Health, who owns a number of hospitals across the country, but in particular has insight into what's happening right now in Florida, where we are seeing infections now in this country above 60,000 a day. So we are right back into very worrisome territory. And what you decide as a governor or a mayor right now about whether to keep a bar open or closed will depend on, will influence whether you can open a school in September.
You know, Margaret, I go to the fancy math charts, and I'll tell you, folks, the fancy math charts of death in some of these states are starting to turn ugly. They're not there yet, but they're really, really difficult. How will Trump-supporting governors adapt and adjust, Margaret, just to get to Face the Nation Sunday, and for that matter, just to get to August?
Well, they're playing catch-up in certain places, but as you just mentioned with Florida, I mean, Governor DeSantis is still not making mask-wearing mandatory everywhere, and he is allowing places like Disney to reopen, even though you are seeing hospitalizations go up along with infection rates. So it is going to be really interesting to watch how the politics of this may change. Dr. Fauci in an interview yesterday was talking about how our divisiveness and partisanship in our country has hobbled us in our response to this virus because it somehow infused politics and made mask wearing and made your reaction to all of this somehow a political indication when it really should just be about a unified response so that we as a country can stamp out the virus.
Margaret, what's the feeling inside the Beltway these days as to the federal response or lack thereof, just in terms of, strategy? The pandemic is a national issue. Does it not require a national or federal response? What's the feeling these days within the Beltway?
Well, the elected officials in Congress are home in their districts. They're not back until, mid-July, July 20th. There's a lot of weight now that will be riding on their shoulders in regard to this next economic rescue package because there's a lot more built in now in terms of potential damage as we see with the spike and questions about schools and questions about unemployment. Within the Beltway, there is some frustration because as Dr. Gottlieb, the former FDA commissioner in the Trump administration, who has been our frequent guest, has highlighted, there is no national strategy on scaling up drug manufacturing right now. That's the problem we saw with Gilead and Remdesivir. There may be other therapeutics that come along that won't be scaled up quickly, and he's raising that concern about vaccines. We need to start having a national conversation about who is first and who is second in line, and we are not hearing that yet.
Well, Margaret, I guess I want to stay on that a little bit. Historically speaking, I don't know if there's any precedent here, but isn't a federal response, a federal guidelines, a federal policy, isn't that something that's typically in their bailiwick? That's something they should be doing. And if it's not coming from the executive branch, should it not come from potentially Congress?
Well, Congress, when they come back, will be talking about things like whether to provide more federal financial aid to school districts that are making decisions on the local level about how to reopen and their rollout plans. But this is also really about the health officials and the guidelines they're delivering. You had this bizarre sort of tension between the health officials and the Vice President Pence and President Trump this week over what the CDC guidelines would be and how stringent they would be. And so, yes, it should be coming from the national area, but the health officials you would think would be in the driver's seat, and you are hearing from them that they are not.
Interesting. Margaret Brennan, thank you so much. Of course, Face the Nation, the CBS television networks. On Sunday morning, you can, of course, hear Margaret Brennan and Face the Nation on Bloomberg Radio, 2 p.m. on Sundays in New York and Washington. And now Bloomberg 106.1 Boston Newburyport. Face the Nation this Sunday at 2 on Bloomberg Radio. Much to talk about here. Markets really on the move. And, of course, Bloomberg Surveillance, always brought to you by Cohn Resnick Advisory. Assurance Tax, are you applying for PPP loan forgiveness? Don't leave money on the table or fail an SBA review. Visit CohnResnick.com/loan forgiveness. Paul, I was greeted this morning by Citigroup's new top of the street price target on Amazon.
Sure.
Paul, it was Jason Bazinet. We'll get him on here, folks.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
His beautiful report modeled out how small Amazon's part of retail is, which I really didn't know.
It's amazing.
It's amazing what they have out the next 3 years.
Yeah, Tom, you think about it. The bull case for Amazon, even before there was something called the cloud and other things, their advertising business, the bull case for Amazon was just very simple, which is, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11% of retail sales today in this country are e-commerce. That means, there's 90% of people still going to bricks and mortar stores. Where do you think that's going over the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Where do you think that 10% number is going over the next 10 years? And the bulls will tell you 15, 20, 25, 30%. Who knows? But it's going higher. And if you believe that simple story, you buy AMZN at any price. And that's kind of been the bull case for Amazon, and they've kind of delivered on that.
Citigroup making a splash this morning. Major shout out to Douglas Cass, who's with a vast investment house in Florida. And we say good morning to Mr. Cass if he's possibly listening. It's possible. Maybe he's up at the Trump fundraiser. Anyways, that was a joke, Paul. But anyways, Doug Cass with a huge bull call on Amazon out any number of years. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, thank you very much. Dr. Anthony Fauci says that divisive politics is hurting the country's response to the coronavirus. Dr. Ashish Jha, director of the Harvard Global Health Institute, says politics should not be a part of the response at all.
Who people need to be listening to are experts like Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, leaders in the CDC. Those are the people who need to be heard right now, not our political leaders.
President Trump addressed a wide range of topics during an interview last evening on Fox News. Regarding coronavirus, the president said he provided ventilators and personal protective equipment to New York Mayor Bill de Blasio. President Trump also says he's passed a cognitive test and challenged presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden to do the same.
I actually took one when I very recently when I was, the radical left was saying, "Is he all there? Is he all there?" And I proved I was all there because I aced it. I aced the test.
The sudden death of Seoul's mayor has caused an outpouring of public sympathy, even as it has raised questions. Sniffer dogs found Park Won-soon's body on a mountainside in northern Seoul. Authorities also say they found what appears to be a suicide note in his official residence. Global news, 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. Futures mixed. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our #1 priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished. With over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
Did somebody say just eat?
Me, get delivery like a G. See, hungry dogs gotta eat. I get mines every day, every week. Chicken wings to the crib, I'm sitting in. Burger in the low. Hope they put the pickle in. Wonton on a catamaran. Oodles and noodles, thank you, my man. Justeat.
Somebody say just eat.
Listen, that's a dream. Everyone has them, jingling away in the back of our minds. And most of the time, that's where dreams stay. So easy to ignore. Anything can drown them out, and everything does. But at Honda, we listen to our dreams. We get right up close. And on really good days, they become reality. From 2022, Honda's mainstream cars will only be hybrid or electric. Honda, the power of dreams.
Breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And it's 9:17 on Wall Street. I'm John Tucker with his Bloomberg Business Flash. U.S. futures, they are a little higher right now, mostly unchanged right before the cash open on Wall Street. Tech shares, they helped the Stocks Europe 600 index erase an earlier decline. This after the Apple chipmaker TSMC posted revenue just above estimates. Gilead Sciences shares, they're higher right now in the pre-market. They have additional data that shows their remdesivir is linked to a 62% cut in COVID-19 mortality risks. Fasten your seatbelts. Earnings season, that starts next week. The top U.S. banks may see the worst quarter since the financial crisis. And no inflation to see here. PPI, final demand prices, fell 0.2% for the month of June. They're 0.8% lower than a year ago. Right now, the Dow futures up 17 points. The S&P E-mini futures 2 points higher right now, and the NASDAQ E-mini futures, they are up 12 points. We check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. The pandemic has changed over the months, over the many weeks. It seems to go week by week. It has changed and now has changed into a serious social issue across this nation. We've been advantaged to have a daily report from the Johns Hopkins University. Here is their Andrew Pekos.
I think you're starting to see the responses to the surging cases. I think this all starts with, the larger public health interventions like closing businesses, stay-at-home orders. Those were all meant to get our case numbers down to a manageable level where testing and contact tracing would be able to keep the numbers low. You've seen a number of states didn't hit low enough levels to loosen those restrictions, and now you're seeing that surge of cases. Masks, social distancing is going to help, but more stringent efforts are going to be needed to get these cases down to a manageable level again.
What's the metric, Dr. Pekos, that you use to reopen an economy? And we talk about the curve, right, that you have to flatten the curve. Does it need to be almost flat to then be able to reopen?
Yeah, so it really depends upon on an individual state's contact tracing mechanisms. The CDC recommends about a 5% test positivity rate as being a good place to aim for. I think if you have a good contact tracing mechanism in place, then you can deal with numbers that are in that range. If it gets much higher than that, then you really stress the system and you're not able to go and trace those cases, identify people, and instill the individual quarantines and stay-at-home orders, which are going to keep us from doing these large-scale, citywide, countywide, statewide stay-at-home orders.
How close are we to a vaccine that would work for a large number of the population?
Yeah, so all the initial signs with the testing of vaccines that are now currently mostly in phase 2 testing are good. We're seeing immune responses to these vaccines that are giving us the signals that we think are associated with protection. I think the thing to realize, to be realistic, is that it's going to take a long time to get the vaccine distributed widely in the country. So while signs are good, the entire vaccine rollout is going to be a process that's going to take a long time to get in place.